So, another year has passed and Riot Games remains, as they have always been, an unceasing fountain of character skins. There were so many skins this year, in fact, that by the time we got to December, I realized that I'd actually missed a bunch of them all throughout the year and I had to scramble to try and catch up. Which is why I want to start by giving a quick thanks to my editor, Minimo, who's been doing the vast majority of the editing work on this channel for most of the year. So if you ever see one of these shorts and you think, ooh, that was a nice little editing move, give thanks to Minimo because that's all them. They are also responsible for most of the music choices in the skin shorts, by the way, so I'm sorry, but I'm not the one putting Honkai Star Rail and Grand Blue music in the shorts. I haven't actually played those games, and I don't have any plans to make videos about them. Although, on the other hand, SEO on gacha games is pretty good, and the character design is interesting sometimes, so maybe that's business for later. The business right now is welcome to a compilation of every review of every single League of Legends skin released in 2024. This compilation is in roughly chronological order, but it does not include the reworked skins from the Skarner or Victor reworks, because, well, those aren't really new 2024 skins. If you stick around to the end, we'll do a little bit of light statistics on the skins of the year, along with some closing thoughts about the states of skins and cosmetics in League of Legends in general. But for now, enjoy the compilation. I'll talk to you later. Dragonmancer has never been a particularly exciting skin line to me, as it's one of those skin lines that's primarily concerned with looking just baseline appealing. You know, cute, cool, powerful, whatever. It's a fairly shallow power fantasy delivered through an over-elaborate style of costuming that isn't really trying to convey much in the way of character or concept. It also doesn't have a strong central aesthetic. If you were to tell me that Dragonmancer Rakan was actually part of the Heavenscale skin line, for example, I wouldn't be able to tell you that you're wrong just by looking at him. His outfit here honestly looks more like a pro wrestling costume than the embodiment of the Dragon of Devotion. His prestige version isn't great either. It tries to give him tight pants with a sensually curling dragon design snaking down his thighs, which, okay, that's a cool idea, but then they pair that with a popped collar coat under which he's shirtless and has a truly baffling shape of facial hair. The effect here is less lovable himbo or smooth lover and more guy who won't stop trying pickup artist Reddit techniques on the bridesmaids at someone's wedding. Kassadin fares a little bit better with his horns and elaborate dragon scale robe, but the color scheme is kind of weak, with teal against dark blue and purple and gold, and especially his hair looks really weird here against his very red skin tone. I think the decision to remove his helmet was a mistake. It could have been designed with all kinds of cool dragon motifs to enhance the fantasy, but instead he just kind of looks like concept art for a rejected Mortal Kombat character. Fiora, meanwhile, looks like a minor Power Rangers antagonist with a rather lopsided costume. It's supposed to evoke the idea that she fought a deadly duel with her own shadow self in order to earn her draconic power, and now she embodies the both of them, but the balance is completely off here. It doesn't look like a harmonious melding of complementing opposites. It looks like two different action figures got mashed together incorrectly at the factory. Especially those eye-searing pink and powder blue contrasts make her look kind of plastic and toy-like rather than dignified and powerful. And finally, Vayne's hair and sharp little glasses along with a long-tailed coat and costume looks more like she wandered over from a Shadowrun mobile game knockoff than anything coherent with the other Dragonmancers. She's meant to be a relentless hunting avenger in this design, as she always is in most of her designs, but could you tell any of that just by looking at her? The splash art does the best it can to give her a sense of menace, but the skin itself ends up looking like someone cosplaying Katie Ayakali at the Renaissance Fair. Dragonmancer just isn't very good in my eyes. It isn't cheesy enough to be fun, and it isn't actually cool enough to ever be impressive. It overloads its skins with detail to try and look complex, but all it really creates is just a visual mess. Here are the grades for the individual skins, but honestly, I wouldn't recommend any of them. I missed a few skins at the start of the year, so I'm stealing a little bit of a format from Nicky Boy and doing a rapid-fire skin review of Primal Ambush. And we'll start with the biggest success of the line, which is Primal Ambush Vi, who has an amazing application of her gauntlets as part of her design. Primal Ambush has some internal lore about certain people being born with superpowers embodied by tiger stripe markings on their skin, and there's a kind of Highlander-esque plot under it all, where they're all trying to kill each other to claim greater strength for themselves. It's thinly sketched, as skinline lore usually is, but for that concept, turning Vi's gauntlets into giant tiger claw middens complete with toe bean markings on the palm is a perfect thematic and tonal match. It's a little bit cheesy, but it still looks lethal. I really like the color scheme here as well. It's gold, again, which so many skin lines overuse, but with Vi's costume primarily being pure black, it contrasts beautifully, and that dark base color makes the color accents like her red sash or teal paw pads really pop. The costuming is understated, but without looking too simplistic, and there's a real sort of 2010s reboot of a 1980s Saturday morning cartoon energy to this that I really like. Like, you just know that the theme song to this show would have been a banger back in the day. Sivir continues that success with a more elaborate and colorful costume, but still grounded surrounded by that central dark black which stops it getting visually noisy. The black bandages are also crisscrossed on her body to leave triangular brighter patches of skin exposed, which creates tiger stripe patterns in the design that just look fantastic. The prominent black accents on her fur collar and her hair gives her an edgier vibe that suits her story as a mercenary gunning for Vi to take her bounty, and I kinda get some 80s anime vibe from her hairstyle too, which I think merges really well with the skin line as a whole. A bit less successful is Riven, who I think just doesn't have nearly as evocative a costume. The red top and sashes along with all the saturated gold completely takes over the color scheme, and they aren't balanced either by the black or the white elements. It's not clear to me why she wears black and white leggings here either, like that kind of yin and yang black and white splitting doesn't seem to relate to anything in either her lore or the rest of her design. She isn't a two opposing halves struggling for balance kind of character. Despite my criticisms though, I still think the skin looks baseline good, just not nearly as coherent as either Vi or Sivir. Finally, Talon is kind of the black sheep of the family, brought down by a bad application of his cloak. The idea of putting tiger claws at the end of it could be really solid, but I think the brown leather texture with the red stripes doesn't really sell it properly. It just ends up looking decorative and kinda too complicated for the concept. I'd rather have the cloak be made from fur from an animal he hunted or something with real claws rather than metal ones, although who knows if his model rig can actually carry that kind of modification. The golden claws draped over his shoulders and whatever those arm rings are under his shoulders also add unnecessary complexity to the design, I think, and the gold color merges way too much with his skin tone. It really is missing some of the strong contrast that the black base color brings to Vi and to Sivir. Also, he's shredded and shirtless with those open slit pants, and that says to me that I'm supposed to see fan service here, but I'm sorry, Talon's model just can't carry that off, not with that posture and animation. It's really not what he's built for. Here are the individual grades, and I like the concept here. I don't think it needs like 24 more skins added to it like Project gets, but I could see this working really well on Set, Katarina, or Pyke. The 3 honor skins are, in some ways, rewards for doing the bare minimum, which is to say, not being an asshole on Summoner's Rift. And I was a bit surprised to find that they do actually have an internal lore. In a world overtaken by cynicism and selfishness, the Order of Solace trains exceptional individuals to be 3 honors stalwarts, fighting for compassion, harmony, and a better world. It's cheesy, but appropriately so, given the purpose of the skins. And so I wish I liked it more. I just don't really feel the costuming here. The blue-gray bodysuit is a mess of overlapping geometric shapes towards no clear purpose, and the gold detailing feels like it sits awkwardly in the middle of the suit and the extremely saturated pink, purple, and oranges of the rest of the costume. The red sash at his waist feels very out of place, and I don't know, the bright cape and the warm hood and the cat ears are great, but the rest of the outfit, it doesn't really do anything for me. It doesn't feel like an elite warrior of the Order of Joy, or like much of anything at all. It's just a bodysuit with shapes on it and a sash across his chest. It feels more like a cop or soldier uniform than the costume of a hero. The Lunar New Year skins are rarely favorites for me, which makes sense. They're not really for me. They're for people who celebrate the Lunar New Year, and commemorative skins are usually less interested in presenting a unique character, which is my area of interest, than they are in presenting a fun seasonal costume. But with Heavenscale Ezreal? But I think they're kind of cooking here. The lore is that Ezreal is a playful, mischievous celestial dragon taking a human form to participate in the Lunar New Year festivities, and I think the skin kind of nails that idea. The bare feet implies this idea of a creature which does not quite understand the purpose of shoes. It's something that's shared across all the Heavenscale skins, and especially in Ezreal, it supports that sense of wildness and childishness. So too does his crooked curling hairbang, which is playful and looks a little bit devilish, and the arm is genuinely clever as an idea. He has got his dragon arm plainly visible, but he has disguised it by going, oh no, this is just my fancy gauntlet, by putting that bracer around his arm. That's clever. There's a lot of bratty gremlin energy in his face here too, that little smirk and the slit dragon pupils, and it's like, yeah, I see a character here, not just a costume, and that's cool. The prestige skins in League of Legends are poorly explained by Riot. They used to be just white and gold versions of the base skin, but that sucked, so now instead they are alternate universe interpretations of the skin. Basically, what if this skin was the inspiration for a high-fashion gala costume? And that has led to some genuinely fantastic fashion skins, some really cool interpretations of League of Legends aesthetics, but Prestige, Heavenscale, Ezreal, I mean, it's fine. Like, yeah, sure, that looks like a fantasy-inspired fancy gala outfit well enough, the color scheme is fine, whatever, but what I'm really missing here is all the personality and charm that Heavenscale Ezreal has in his base form. His base form is a mischievous little bratty gremlin, and the Prestige just loses all of that. I think there's a version you could make of this that's a little bit more childish, a little bit more asymmetrical and wild, that shows a bit of skin, that looks a little bit less like he's wearing a formal suit, that's a little bit provocative, and that would have been a better translation of the base character. As it is, the Prestige version just looks entirely too respectable. The Heavenscale skin's story is that they're all divine dragons assuming human form to secretly attend the Lunar New Year celebrations, and I'm sorry, but who at this festival gets fooled by Janna? Like, oh yeah, the half-naked lady with the floating ribbons and the glowing dragon scale tattoos and divine god staff. Oh, that's just Sarah from up the road. Besides that, though, it has the problem that all Janna skins do, that her model and animations are outdated and can't really carry complex modern skins very well anymore. That twisted spaghetti hair is like, oh dear. And on a design level, I do feel like it's missing a lot of personality. Heavenscale Ezreal manages to present a very distinct and fun character archetype with its design, and while some personality is present in the splash art, Janna's costuming and design is mostly preoccupied with saying, hey, this is a divine dragon, it's a divine dragon in human form, and it doesn't really say anything about what kind of dragon she is or what kind of personality she might have. Heavenscale is first and foremost a set of commemorative costumes, mind you, so they're not really that much about the story and character, and I will say, besides anything else, it is a very pretty skin. The color scheme is really solid, and the staff looks amazing, so, you know, for Janna, maybe that's good enough. My constant disappointment with Kai'Sa skins is that Riot seems to refuse to remember that she's supposed to be wearing a living symbiote suit, and they never do anything with that idea even when it would be so cool. The Heavenscale skins are supposed to be divine dragons taking human form to secretly attend a festival, and like, would it not have been incredibly cool if Kai'Sa's helmet toggle light let her turn into a dragon, or at least have a dragon head and turn her feet and hands into claws? Like, anything. Kai'Sa's evolving symbiote suit is perfect for the idea of a skin that transforms between forms, but like, here, no, it's just a couple of floating orbs hovering behind her like always in all her goddamn skins, doing nothing with the idea of physical transformation that's supposed to be core to her character identity. The toggle just puts a mask on her face. Woo. Besides that disappointment, the skin is inoffensively competent, I guess. It's very boring, but the colors are nice. I think the open slit trousers are a cool costume piece, and I don't 100% understand why she's wearing a tube top, but the red and green and gold color scheme is good. I think Kai'Sa skins could really be something special if they would be a little more creative with it. Heavenscale Master Yi is boring. Yeah, basically just kind of boring, but in part, that's because it's just completely inoffensively competent. Heavenscale are divine dragons disguising themselves as humans to go to the Lunar New Year's festival, and Master Yi is the strict, disciplined swordsmaster teacher to the young dragon prince, and yeah, sure, Master Yi looks like that, why not? It's a little bit weird that he's shirtless, I guess, but it's also not a problem, and hey, it's kind of cool that he wears a mask. That's a nice feature, so yeah, sure, why not? The sword looks cool. I like the little floating orb. Maybe Master Yi's hands and feet could stand to a little bit more draconic, I guess, but yeah, it's fine. Like, there's nothing to say here. This skin is just so fine that it's boring. Heavenskin Smolder is his launch skin, and it manages the rare feat of being actually kind of better than his base form. Base Smolder has the problem that he just simply does not look like a baby dragon, at least not like the baby of the kind of lizard-like dragon that his mom is. His face is just way too human. Heavenscale Smolder, though, reframes his design in a much more leonine and cat-like way, with that red baby mane and fluffy wings and big chunky cat paws feet, and while yeah, he still looks a little uncannily too human, his face is a much better fit for a dragon kitten than a dragon baby lizard. The cloud-like golden wings are pretty cool visually, even if the VFX could do more to make them look ethereal, and I really like that deep burgundy red against the pale white skin and the gold accents. It's a good color scheme. Launch skins usually end up being the weakest in a champion's lineup over time, as artists figure out what kind of fantasies fit best on the character, but Heavenscale is a really strong starting point. Smolder looks good in this aesthetic. Heavenscale Diana. Well, I think the best that you can say for this skin is that it looks more or less exactly like you might expect a Heavenscale Diana skin to look, which is to say that she's wearing some East Asian fantasy fashion, there's a tiny performative bit of dragon scales on her sword arm, and she's got big blue dragon horns. If you wanted her to look meaningfully draconic in some way, or have the implication of a unique personality or anything like that, well, more the fool you, that's not what we're doing here. And it sucks a little bit because the lore of the skin is that she's a scholar of the Dragon Prince's court, an academic chronicling the journey, and man, that might have been a fun way to present Diana especially. Give her a journal dangling from her waist, give her nerdy librarian glasses, replace her sword with some kind of, I don't know, combat quill or something. There are ways in which this skin could reflect a little bit of character and be something kind of unique, but well, I guess that's not really the point of Heavenscale. Setting all of that aside, it does look baseline quite nice. It's a good costume, it's well fitted on her, the animation looks nice on her recall, it's not bad craft, it's just really boring. What the fuck's the point of Heavenscale Lee Sin? Like, yeah, I know he's associated with dragons and whatever, but, like, he already has a legendary dragon-themed skin, and it's substantially better and more interesting, and Lee Sin isn't even really a good fit for the character he's supposed to play here. He's supposed to be the young, noble dragon prince of the heavens, drawn to the lunar festival below by curiosity and youthful indiscretion to see the festivities, and, like, he does not look like that. Lee Sin is a grown-ass, whole-ass man. He looks like the king of dragons. Nothing about him carries any air of inexperience or youth or even curiosity and playfulness, for that matter, which is supposed to be what this character is about. I also don't dig the animation of this skin. It goes very, very hard on some extremely cartoony squash and stretch and model breaking that just doesn't suit this design very well, and there's a lot of his posing and movement that feels weirdly unbalanced and way too floaty and weightless. The design and movement of this character feels at war with itself and not at all up to the quality standards that are usually applied to a legendary. Also, that fucking 1% divine Heavenscale glorified chroma from the capsules, yeah, that. Don't waste your money trying to wail for that worthless gacha trash. Holy shit. I called Porcelain Kindred their worst skin by far because it simply was not designed to work with Kindred's model and ended up with some truly wonky animation as a result. Lamb is a deceptively cartoony and animalistic model and simply does not work very well when turned into a human, and Riot seems to agree with me because Prestige Porcelain Kindred seems, at least in part, to be designed to address those problems. Now, it's a prestige skin, which means that it's not technically actually a porcelain skin, it's a high fashion skin, which is a separate universe, but a lot of the spirit of porcelain is in here, in the smooth and decorated surfaces that define the Kindred's gear. And I gotta say, I like the juxtaposition of wild manes of hair against the smooth perfection of porcelain quite a bit. It creates a lot of visual interest and contrast, which I really mourn that the base porcelain skin never got to explore. On the flip side, I don't know that I 100% buy this skin as like a high fashion runway thing, which is technically what it's supposed to be. Lamb ultimately looks like a fighter in armor here, not a fashionista in an outfit, but I am fully ready to simply headcanon this as the new Porcelain Kindred in the base universe because it just looks way better. Aurelian Soul is kind of a perfect fit for Porcelain in theory. It's a skin line based around hard porcelain constructs imbued with ghostly powers, and Aurelian is already an ethereal star dragon bound to a hard metal crown and a bony face. The conversion seems obvious. And honestly, if anything, I wish Porcelain Protector had made him less solid. If the head alone had been this incredibly elaborate painted porcelain piece with a dragon motif on it, and the rest of the body had been ghostly spiritual power imbuing it, I think that would have been a really strong concept, like a decorative porcelain art piece haunted by a great spirit. Instead, they went for something more like an armor set, basically. His body is covered in porcelain, which I think is shaped in decidedly unporcelain-like ways, to the point that he almost sort of looks more like a mecha than an elaborate, delicate art piece. And I don't know, some of the majesty is missing for me here a little bit. He looks elaborate, complex, expensive, but especially with the 1.5 million gold accents, I get taken away from that stately, stark simplicity of cerulean paint on pure white ceramic that porcelain evokes at its best. The concept here is good, but this skin feels like it missed its potential by being too eager to be spectacular. Porcelain Darius feels pointless. For one thing, he's just literally copying Ezreal's tiger porcelain motif. That's literally his lore. He's the previous owner of the tiger spirit, and now he's back, and wow, how compelling visually. And for another, there's just nothing going on with him here. When Porcelain is at its best, with Amumu and arguably Lysandra, the porcelain aesthetic is used to shift something about their design, change the kind of character that they are. With Darius, the whole thing is bending over itself backwards to change nothing about him whatsoever. His porcelain armor looks as bulky and chunky as any metal armor, missing out on the delicacy and subtle beauty of the material, which, like, then what's the point of the porcelain armor if it's just going to be shaped and designed like metal plate? The same thing with his axe. It's a giant slab of solid chunky material. It might as well be rock or steel. The decorations also lack any sense of the fine line work or careful artistry that so defines porcelain art. It's just big chunky color surfaces with barely any decorativism or subtlety here. Darius in porcelain armor sounds like a really cool idea. There's a lot of tension between his brutality and the delicate fragility of the material there, but none of it is explored in this skin, so what's even the point of doing it then? Apparently, this is an Aurelia skin, although I couldn't tell from looking at the splash art, because even with how much same-face syndrome exists in League of Legends, you simply cannot tell me that this face is the same as that. And I don't mind a skin whose primary purpose is to simply put a character in a cute or pretty costume, but it is a little bit disheartening when a skin is so uninterested in the character that is being applied to that it can't even be bothered to look like the same person. Which is the problem. This skin isn't interested in putting Aurelia in a cool outfit or even in exploring porcelain as an aesthetic. It's just, here's a beautiful woman in a pretty dress, and that's not enough. Aurelia's blades, the most obvious place to explore decorated porcelain ideas in her design, are so covered in gold trim that they just look piss yellow from a distance. And you know, for a second I thought the skin had a really cool idea of giving Aurelia one porcelain jointed doll leg, but nope, that's just a random gold strap around her knee for reasons that are not entirely clear to me. She's supposed to be the guardian of the ox spirit in the lore, which, Jesus Christ, just give that to Alistar, because in Aurelia that's literally only represented by a cute hair accessory. What's the point of pretending this is her theme? This skin can barely be bothered to pretend like it cares about either Aurelia or the porcelain skin line that it's in. It's filler. It's empty, empty filler. Porcelain Graves had the potential to be the most interesting of the new batch of Porcelain skins because, like, yeah, Porcelain Gun! And making him the rough and tumble rogue of the lineup, hey, that's an interesting character dynamic, especially next to Ezreal's do-gooder archaeologist Catboy and Lux's perfect Porcelain Princess archetype. Unfortunately, in execution, it doesn't really do that much with him. The Aurelian Soul-shaped gun is fun, the streaks of silver and the haircut are charming features on Graves, but his costuming and design present him as every bit as clean, well-mannered, put together, and proper as all the other Porcelain heroes, entirely undercutting any sense of individual personality that he might have had. Like, you'd think at least on Graves we could play with chipped porcelain aesthetics, like maybe he could be wearing something more modern, like a leather jacket with a porcelain paint motif on it, rather than the heroic fabric getup that he's stuck in. Just something to differentiate him, to make him unique inside of the skin line. Instead, Porcelain Graves seems to have been added to the skin line mostly just to add more characters to the skin line, and that's a pity, because there was potential here for something interesting and different. I still like the Aurelian Soul Shotgun, though. That's a really good bit. I was gonna review these separately, but then I realized I was just gonna be repeating myself. Morgana here is supposed to be a powerful porcelain sorcerer, but there's none of the rigidity or constructed decorativism in her design that Porcelain is supposed to bring. Like, they sort of try to give her porcelain wings, but her model can't support that at all, and they just end up looking feathery and soft like always. Porcelain is about rigid, delicate, finely painted ceramics, and Morgana simply doesn't have anything with that vibe in her design here. Misfortune fares better in that she at least has the porcelain guns, but her dragon pistols are just a lot less compelling than Graves' dragon shotgun, I think. But her costuming here is also just generic. Like, it's too tame to be sexy fan service, it's too basic to be a compelling outfit, and it doesn't really have any visible theming reflecting the porcelain spirit she's supposed to be channeling. Porcelain Misfortune, like Aurelia before them, are filler skins. They are not interested in the skin line that they're a part of. Porcelain is more of a vague art direction for them, a color scheme, than an actual concept that they care about exploring. And unfortunately, that's nothing new. Every major skin line in League of Legends is eventually filled with these skins that are made simply to add more skins to the line, rather than to explore any interesting narrative or aesthetic ideas in their universe. It sucks. Another year, another set of project skins, and to think we used to complain that Naruto had too much filler. The strength of Jax in this context is that with his mask and his fully covered body, he should be pretty easy to convert into a cybernetic or robotic form. It's a natural fit for his base design. The splash art is definitely going hard on trying to sell that vibe, and for the most part, successfully. It's a very gorgeous piece of artwork, I will say. The in-game model, though, struggles a bit more. It ends up looking more fantasy than tech to me, more like a knight in armor than a cyborg or an android. I feel like the staff's design especially doesn't quite work. In the splash art, it's this angular, flat-headed projection device surrounded by hard light appendages, which looks quite cool, but in-game, it all just kind of congeals into a blocky shape, like a big solid bonking stick, a mace, without all the sleek, lightweight lethality that the splash art implies, and which really would have carried the tech angle here. It wouldn't take a lot of adjusting, I think, to make Jax look more robotic and cybernetic here, but as it stands, he's just way too easily confused for another Ashen Knight skin. Being a dog, Naafiri is instantly more interesting than most skins in the project line because she isn't just another human in a plug suit with a laser weapon. The sleek, mechanized lethality of the project line works really well with the aggression and agility of her base animation, even if I think the extremely fluid and organic animation and posing she has sometimes contradicts the robot premise of the skin. I'm missing a little bit of that stiff, calculated machine precision. Her mane of daggers here is turned into, I guess, a plume of hardlight chainsaws, which on the one hand, that is straight up some 40k, and that rules, but then on the other hand, it feels a little bit primitive conceptually next to all the all-digital, cutting-edge laser sleekness that the project line generally is based around. The skin also has the genuinely cool idea to give her an actual mane of white fur, an aesthetic touch that's shared with skins like Jhin and Jinx, and that's a really cool idea, even if I think it really fails to show up on the actual model. It just looks like she has a white metal back, nothing hairy about it. But the biggest knock against this skin is the minion dogs. With their red color and fluid animation, they just don't look like robots. They look like generic hell demons, and it completely muddies the waters on the aesthetic here. I just don't think it works. I will say I respect the pink on Project Gangplank a lot, like that is the boldest color choice for him and good on them for making it. Besides that though, I really don't have much good to say about this skin, it just isn't trying hard enough. Like Gangplank's prosthetic arm, right? In his base skin he has this chunky, brutal sort of steampunk metal gauntlet, he's literally iron-fisted, it's a great bit of characterization for him. But in this, the cyborg cybernetics android tech future skin, it's just a arm? Like, literally, it's just an arm that holds his sword? I just, like, is that all you could come up with? Having a cool cyborg arm is one of Gangplank's defining characteristics, and a normal-as arm is all you've got? It also doesn't help that his sword looks like a plastic toy and his gun looks like the default gun you get in the first level of a sci-fi shooter game, nor does it help that his armor suit is so painfully generic as to defy description. Like, what could anyone possibly say is interesting about this? Yeah, no, the skin sucks, but the cyborg arm is really the main thing. Like, come on, you had to be able to come up with something better than just a normal-ass looking arm. Crystalis and Indomitus are the mythic essence skins. Extra rare, special, limited edition, premium, exclusive, special, premium, rare cosmetics that are special, premium, and rare. It's a kind of capstone to reward you for investing your finite lifetime into grinding out levels, chests, and event passes. As such, their primary aesthetic goal is to seem worth it. They need to be fancy and expensive looking. They need to attract attention and show off your accomplishment to other players. And the Kha'Zix and Nautilus versions of these skins certainly do that. Crystalis and Indomitus borrows the geometric shiny crystal aesthetic that prestige skins and KDA use to make themselves look fancy, and on top of that, there's the always mandatory generous helping of gold, which is supposed to make the skin look extra valuable. And for what they are, yeah, they work for their purpose. They look premium, they look expensive. They also look a bit gaudy and a bit kitsch, perhaps maybe trying a little bit too hard, but I guess that kind of is the point. Kha'Zix takes it maybe a little bit too far. There's so much detail on him that I can barely make out what shape he's supposed to be, while I think Nautilus balances the color scheme better, with more dark metal to make the gold and crystal pop and sparkle. At a final analysis, yeah, sure, if you want to look fancy, you could do worse than one of these. Like a lot of champions, Gragas really suffers from Riot being bad at visual update. His skins struggle at every turn against the character model that has not been updated in 14 years. Case in point, High Noon Gragas, which tries to dress him up as an affable Gothic West saloon owner, immaculately styled in a leather vest and a fine linen shirt. And certainly in the splash art, he does look really good, but in-game, there's just no getting around the model. The heavy detailing of the High Noon design gets really squashed into a rather awkward, chunky blob that just doesn't move very well. Space Groove got around this by relying on big, cartoony primary color surfaces, but High Noon's gritty, ornate Gothic decorativism just cannot do that. And besides the technical problems, I do wish Gragas looked a little bit less like a cowboy and more like a saloon owner here, too. I don't really think the cowboy hat works with that character, neither do his armored shoes or the bullet belt on his stomach, and it doesn't really feel like this design is 100% clear on which Old West archetype it is trying to portray. I love the beard, though. That looks great, and this is going to be an amazing skin once he has a visual update. It is still weird to me that Rel didn't get a High Noon skin as her launch skin, because the match of champion to skin thematic is just absolutely perfect here. I really can't stress that enough. This just feels right. Rel in a cowboy-themed skin is just correct, and even High Noon's otherwise nonsensical habit of slapping useless revolver chambers and everything finds the perfect outlet here, turning Rel's lance into essentially a kind of long Winchester rifle with a Hellfire bayonet attached. And the horse, like, holy shit, the horse looks fantastic. I love its design and its details. It looks so goddamn good in motion. Having said all of that, I don't actually like her white and gold outfit, and I know exactly why she's wearing it. It's for contrast. It makes her pop against the pitch black and red horse. I get it, but it also just visually implies the kind of half-angel, half-demon nonsense trope that High Noon already has way too much of. High Noon Yone is doing it in this same drop of skins. I just wish they'd done anything else to get that contrast. I go with the yellow in her hair instead of the white and gold versus black and red. Anyway, none of that matters. The skin is a perfect fit for Rel. I just have a neurosis about this. High Noon is a skin line in love with Old West fashion, specifically the kind of over-elaborate self-decoration you'd see in a glossy Hollywood Western. In that context here, Evelyn is playing the archetype of the lethal, seductive saloon performer femme fatale, and it works brilliantly. With her corset, deep pushed-up cleavage, and garters showing bare thighs, Evelyn looks, in the context of Old West aesthetics, utterly scandalous. It's a burlesque aesthetic, the provocative sexuality of a practiced performer, and what she's performing is an archetype that is, in fiction, usually coded as sex workers, which makes me a little surprised that Riot didn't crack the censorship whip over this skin. Good on them for not doing it, though, because that character fits Evelyn's model and animations absolutely perfectly, and gets a lot of room for cool details like the rose and feathers in her hair and the many decorative ribbons accentuating her outfit. The sharp contrast between her seductive, inviting sexuality and the lethal claws and hellfire burning in her eyes works brilliantly, and while I still hate that High Noon skins put gun barrels on everything like her lashers do not need them, this skin is a great example of what good, character-motivated fan service can look like. Prestige skins are alternate universe versions of skins that try to adapt their general aesthetic vibe into a high-fashion, prestigious gala outfit, and Prestige High Noon Evelyn is one of the ones I don't think works very well. It tries to imply a cowboy aesthetic with a demonstratively tiny cowboy hat and a few tassels on the boots and hips, and I guess with the see-through mesh corset thing, but the crystal and prism decorations and color scheme just makes it look like a rejected KDA Evelyn skin, and because Evelyn here is so much more covered up, it doesn't have the provocative, sexual, seductive edge that makes High Noon Evelyn so striking. The skin as a whole, in fact, doesn't quite seem to know whether it wants to go for femme fatale seduction or overwhelming high fashion glamour, and the halfway compromise it makes between them just comes across as weirdly way too conservative. This feels middle of the road and inoffensive, like it's worried about upsetting anyone, and I feel that Evelyn should always at least in some way be provocative and dangerous. If they wanted crystals and glitter and western themes, why not go with a campier Dolly Parton vibe? You know, all rhinestones and bedazzling and overwhelming hyper-feminine presence? Because when any version of Evelyn walks into a room, nobody should be able to ignore her. Shit, this skin is really f***ing good, actually. I was so ready to hate this. Yet another pretty boy sexy man Yone skin, but this one is just executed too damn well. Even with the tired half-demon, half-human trope going on in his design, it works because he's not half-human, he's half corpse. And it's the colors that really do it. His pale, death-like white and blues and the pallid skin that he has makes for a perfect contrast with the vital, angry black and red orange of hell. And it gives his design a sense of being less a cowboy demon badass, but something withered and kind of pathetic, which is just barely holding on due to its demonic possession. He looks weak here, like a man possessed by a power which is beyond him. With his disheveled hair and the hat drooping limply down over his face, he looks sad, he looks a little bit pitiable. He looks like his story is a tragedy for which the only end is the merciful release of death, and I like that so much better than yet another invincible cowboy demon superhero. Honestly, my biggest criticism is for the splash art, which didn't seem to get that memo and just presented him as a cool, sexy man. And like, no, that's the opposite of the interesting way to portray him. What are you doing? I praised High Noon Yone a lot, or at least the character design on the model, for leaning into High Noon Yone as this half-dead corpse of a man barely clinging to life through demonic power, shambling from town to town as this miserable, emaciated revenant, a corpse that doesn't know how to give up longing for salvation. It's an interesting and much more narratively compelling take on the demon cowboys of High Noon than the untouchable Wild West badasses that the skins mostly portray. Which is why Peacemaker High Noon Yone sucks, because it's another fucking one of those. And I don't really know the lore here exactly. Is this Yone before he got turned into a pallid corpse, or a version of him that got saved by angelic powers? Well, it doesn't really matter, because the result is yet another gothic cowboy superhero, all brown and gold and power fantasy samurai with a cool scarf and red hair and angel feathers on his coattails, and oh my fucking god, this is so fucking boring. It's just, whoa, hey, look at me, I'm powerful and strong and epic and cool and epic and I have angel powers, whoa, and there's no there. It's a paid MMO cosmetic. It's cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It is all sugar and absolutely no taste. Pyramid Head Cheese cosplay isn't a phrase I had on my 2024 bingo card, but Cheddar Thief Twitch, say that 10 times fast, probably came as a surprise to all of us. Like, the cheese wedge even has the rim of Pyramid Head's helmet, and he kind of wears an apron, which is like, this isn't a coincidence, right? I'm not crazy. The splash art casts him as zesty dip sacks pursuing horror monster, and it's a remarkably weird extra layer to a skin that really didn't need to be anything other than the rat champion wearing a bunch of silly cheese accessories, making him this stalking, faceless pizza parlor fever dream with cheese knives on his crossbow and one held in his tail and all stained with the chunky cheddar blood of his most recent kill. That's really fucking extra. That's getting weird with it. And I want more skins to get weird with it. Like, imagine a Resident Evil themed version of Pizza Delivery Sivir running away from Sion, a fast food Mr. X cosplay. Like, that would be cool, right? Am I crazy? Anyway, much though I appreciate the visual design, the best feature of this skin is definitely the muffled voice filter they put on his voice lines, so they sound like they're coming from inside the cheese helmet. That is just funny. Ornn has a new best skin, and he will continue to have a new best skin forever because I don't think anything will ever top Choo Choo. Ornn in his base form already has the aura of a dad who's way the hell into model trains and miniatures and who gets upset if you touch them without permission, and Choo Choo turns that vibe up to 11 and beyond, dressing him in an absolutely adorable combination train engineer outfit and actual train cosplay. His horns here become chimneys, his forging hammer becomes a coal shovel, and the anvil is a big old pipe wrench now. The horn he blows for his ultimate is now a conductor's train whistle, and the ultimate itself, of course, is a chunky little adorable model train that comes when it's called. That said, the design isn't really perfect as a standalone. This skin, more than most of them, gets its appeal from its visual and sound effects. From the chugga chugga effect on his bellows breath to the railway themed spell effects to the train noises in his sounds, the skin only really works with that extra support. Still, who cares? As a complete package, this is absolutely fantastically charming, and I don't think an Ornn skin will ever top it. Oh my god, they gave Rammus a skin. Rammus, of course, is one of the OG champions who has never been updated, and for that reason, his skins can only ever be so good. Short of a legendary skin, which good luck pitching that at Riot right now, Rammus's model simply cannot animate or really do very much. So Durian Defender sells itself hard on concept, and it is a pretty decent one. Durian fruits are legendarily smelly, but also famously very sweet and delicious, and they have an extremely distinctive spiky shell, which is frankly a pitch-perfect fit for our little armored Dillo. Honestly, to me, this spike pattern actually looks better than the sharp, regular spikes on his base skin. It communicates to me his thorn damage concept a lot better and with much more visual appeal. And the shell really does need to look good, because 99.9% of the time you see Rammus, that is all you see. He actually wears a cute little neckerchief in this skin, but good luck spotting that outside of the recall, and the color scheme is a simple, cheerful yellow, which is fine, but also unremarkable. Still, it is a good, cute little cheerful skin, and frankly, Rammus needs more of those. Well, holy Cho'Gath has a new best skin. As is obvious, Cho'Gath's biggest problem with any skin is that his model is ancient and his animation is clunky and awkward. That's the major reason Broken Covenant doesn't really work, despite having a theoretically awesome design. So Toy Terror turns him into an awkward, lumpy T-Rex toy with spinny googly eyes and stuffing bursting out of his seams, onto which some enterprising child has attached adorable dinosaur mouth grabber arms, and it's so f***ing perfect because everything bad about Cho'Gath, his rig, his animations, works pitch perfect in tone and movement here to make him look like an adorable chunky toy trundling clumsily along the rift. And the big broad head is a really big part of the charm here. It makes his proportions that much cuter, and the slightly pog-faced, constantly open mouth gives a real sense of head-empty, no-thought, plushy charm. The stuffing poking out of his seams and the little patch on his side also implies the idea of a toy that's really well-loved, that's been played with and hugged and fixed 100 times by a kid who just loves him so much. And, like, how can you not feel good about that? Looking at this skin just makes me happy. Zac is a tough champion to make skins for, because you can pretty much only turn him into things that are liquid or slimy, and anything he wears on his body has to be plausibly able to stretch and morph to match his animations, and that rules out, well, most solid objects. Zesty Dip's idea is to turn him into, well, Zesty Nacho Cheese Dip, which, I mean, that's definitely an idea. I do appreciate that he's wearing a puffy crop top vest and booty shorts with the chancla sandals here. It gives him a really cheerful himbo vibe that I like, but for all that they're trying really hard to theme him as a nacho cheese dip with the chips and jalapenos and chunk of tomato on his arms, looking at him in action, well, most of the time he just kind of looks like yellow sack chroma with a couple of costume pieces on, which again, with Zac, that's kind of an unavoidable limitation of the champion, but still, it is a bit of a pity. Thus, the VFX has to do a lot of the heavy lifting here, leaning in really hard to the texture and goopiness of thick nacho cheese, and it is very successful on that front. And thus, I think this probably is Zac's best skin. It's certainly his most charming one, even if it can't reimagine him quite as radically as other champions' best skins manage with them. I missed the Blood Moon skins in 2024, so let's cover them quickly now. Blood Moon Zed is kind of a tragic skin. On the one hand, this thematic is such an obvious fit for him, right? Blood Moon Zed. Well, of course there has to be a Blood Moon Zed. Are you kidding me? It's genuinely astonishing that there isn't one already. How was Blood Moon Zed not his launch skin? Blood Moon Zed is such an open and shut, absolute slam dunk of a perfect match between a champion and a skin line that it kind of becomes a problem. The skin itself looks great. The mask is cool, his animation and shadow forms work great with the lore of Blood Moon, and the sleek, edgy lethality of the Blood Moon aesthetic maps really well onto his costuming. My only criticism is that the naked chest is too human, and I would like it if he was more visibly demonic and uncanny, but honestly, that's just a nitpick. No, the problem is that it's Blood Moon Zed. It's so obvious. It's so obvious that it just doesn't feel special. It doesn't feel unique or interesting or even particularly creative. It is the most obvious skin for the most obvious champion. It is a very well-crafted skin, and I just can't help but find it boring. Fiddlesticks could also be said to be kind of an obvious Blood Moon skin, at least insofar as he is a horror-themed demon champion, and Blood Moon is a horror-themed demon skin line. And as a Blood Moon character, he looks genuinely gorgeous, actually. He has beautiful costuming, a vibrant and powerful color scheme, a gorgeous paper lantern dangling from his arm in his idle animation, a beautifully crafted scythe, and his reaping claw hand is rendered here as a sleek and detailed bird-like claw to match his Tengu/Yatagarasu motif. The trouble with all of that well-crafted, gorgeous beauty is that, well, Fiddlesticks is kind of supposed to be a mess. His base form is this shambling, brutish golem of farm equipment and burlap sacks, and he's animated that way, too. His animation emphasizes that he's not sleek or smooth or well-crafted. He's a pile of garbage brought to life by a crow demon whose consciousness is little more than an eternal scream of terror. That's why he's scary. And that's Blood Moon Fiddlesticks' problem to me. He looks beautiful, gorgeous, amazingly well-crafted, and just not very scary at all. He looks too pretty, which makes his shambling animation read as comedic clumsiness rather than uncanny horror monster movement. Just a little bit of mess, a little bit of jagged wildness would have done so much for this version of the character. The tragedy of Zyra is that her character design kind of sucks in her base form, but it translates so well into skins that she tends to bat pretty far above average on the rare occasion that she gets. Blood Moon Zyra is a good example because it casts her as this demonic priestess of the Blood Moon who presents a beautiful face up front and hides her true demonic face under the mask on the back of her head, echoing the Futakuchi Onna out of Japanese folklore. Her design's baseline sex appeal thus makes sense for the character that's being portrayed, which is more than can be said for her base form. Her costuming and color scheme is striking, taking full advantage of the Blood Moon red to create a lot of beautiful contrast work. I love that her thorny lashers are now literally her hair that she controls to attack with, and her thorn spitters look genuinely beautiful and deadly as these lush crimson demon flowers. This is a genuinely fantastic skin, only really held back by the aging model. The Empyrean skin line actually has a really extensive internal lore all about multiversal and multi-timeline assassination plots and a struggle to save the world, but aesthetically it is limited. It's black rubber bodysuits with sharp accents and bright neon color fringes, and that's sort of the long and short of it, really. And unfortunately, Akali doesn't really do anything particularly interesting with that. Her bodysuit is indistinct, there's no unique shape language, and it doesn't really take anything from her ninja identity. It's just a suit jacket with a wide collar. And honestly, the neon colors here aren't even really that compelling. The idea is that you're supposed to have these bright, shining explosions of color against the inky black of the suit, but it just doesn't really pop here, I don't think. Even her spell effects look kind of boring. When she goes into her smoke cloud, her hair just turns white, which, like, really? That's all you had for Akali? Besides which, most of her abilities don't really lend themselves to spectacular spell effects, so there's not really that much here for the skin to work with. If you're really into the Empyrean aesthetic, this is probably a fun cosmetic, but as a character design, it's basically nothing. There's nothing here. The Empyrean aesthetic promises brilliant fireworks, absolute explosions of color contrasted against the deep black of its character designs. In the splash art, Empyrean brand delivers on that promise many times over, but on Summoner's Rift, not quite so much. Empyrean designs are low on variety, they all look kinda similar to one another, but Brand at least finds a little character expression with the shape of his double-layered sharp collar recalling the licking of flames, and his hair is shaped like fire, albeit it doesn't seem to be animated or have any visual effects on it, rendering the effect less like he has a full head of extra-dimensional flame, and more like his hairdresser got overzealous with the wax and it's the 90s again. His spell effects, ostensibly a big draw for the Empyrean line, are also not particularly impressive here. It's mostly just bursts of dark purple with pale yellow, a bit of pink and blue accents. It's a far cry from the orgy of color that's suggested by the splash art. The stylization here is cool, but even his alt just kinda looks mid. Empyrean Kayle is one of the better new Empyrean skins, if nothing else because it is brave enough to at least take a creative risk. When you first load into the game with Empyrean Kayle, she looks pretty fucking boring, honestly. The orgy of color from the splash art is nowhere to be seen, and instead her wings are a very drab blue and green with barely any pop to her colors. But her level up mechanic kicks in, it adds the extra wings, turns her head into a very slightly biblically accurate angel vibes thing with a mask hovering in the middle of raging flames, and by level 16, finally, orange, yellow, and red takes over her wings, and she finally looks interesting. And it is a genuine risk to ask the player to wait that long to look good in a skin, but if they're committed to Kayle, well, I guess they're kinda used to it. Still, the final result is nowhere near as colorful as the splash art promises, and rather than providing a contrast for all her bright spell effects, her drab, dark bodysuit just kinda feels like it's weighing the design down, like dead weight, like literally it's just dangling there. It feels rather unbalanced. The Prestige skins are high-fashion skins inspired by whatever line they're attached to, and Prestige Empyrean Kayle kinda disappoints me, honestly. Empyrean is all about these big, bold color orgies, light exploding out from inky blackness, and that should be absolute candy to a Prestige skin because Prestige skins often get to be a little bit wilder with their color schemes than the base designs. Prestige Empyrean Kayle, though, I mean, first of all, the fashion just isn't that interesting, is it? I like the asymmetry of having one thigh out to play, the big 80s girl boss shoulder pads suit her, but the rest of it is just like a studded belt on the waist, a pleated skirt under the suit jacket, and a stocking on one leg. The level 16 version pops a little bit better with that sharp, colorful collar and the hair, but honestly, losing the cleavage on this outfit just makes it feel closed off and recalcitrant rather than unleashed and at maximum power. It feels shy all of a sudden. I do like the effects on the wings. At their best, they look like glowing stained glass, but at their worst, they just kind of look shredded and torn and a little bit raggedy, and that feels like a big problem for something that is trying so hard to look glamorous and prestigious. Malzahar's ancient model will always be the biggest problem with any of his skins, but it's not too bad for Empyrean. His outfit is mostly kind of basic and uninteresting, there's not a lot going on there, but the asymmetrical collar and the scarf add some flair and personality. His spell effects are also broadly, well, not spectacular, but they're good. His Q with the double portals especially has a great pop to it, and his ultimate opens an appropriately horrifying looking shattered rift under the opponent, and he doesn't even look like he's vomiting on them as much as he usually does, because here all of the energy is being projected out of a portal in front of his face. And because Malzahar is a character who tends to be wreathed in spell effects, and because the Empyrean skins mostly wear black, undifferentiated, indistinct bodysuits, the flaws in his model and animations are pretty darn well hidden here. He really does look better than usual. Unfortunately, the Voidlings suck here. I'm sorry, but what the hell is this? It looks like a helmet of a Gundam that sprouted wimpy little spider legs. These things look like children's toys. They look ridiculous. They look wobbly and weak, and their animation just makes them look like they're trying to gently headbutt things to death. They undercut the entire rest of the skin, and kinda fatally. Holy shit, a skin that makes Nocturne look good? Empyrean Nocturne casts him as an interdimensional parasite, hopping dimensions and feeding on the flame that grants all Empyreans their powers, and, well, he doesn't look like that so much, I think. He looks way too much like just half of a guy wearing a suit, but in Empyrean, Nocturne has found a great match for his ridiculous 2011-ass proportions. His enormous, clunky wrist blades, always the biggest problem for any skin, provide a lot of space here for Empyrean flames to burn, and the blades, in turn, can be made to look more slender and elegant than they are inside of the fiery aura, which makes him look way less ridiculous than he usually does. The huge collar on his torso is also a great choice. Empyrean is all about that inky black with bright colors playing in contrast to each other, and the collar does a great job of enabling that interplay on his character design. His smoketail looked great here as a stylized void, pulsing with color fringes, and his spell effects played really well with the Empyrean aesthetic. Genuinely, this is a really good skin for Nocturne. It's a great match of a champion to a skin line that suits him. Varus gets the legendary of the Empyrean skin line this year, and for the most part, it's pretty darn successful. Certainly, it is the skin that does by far the best job of delivering on Empyrean's basic aesthetic fantasy, which is bright, high-contrast neon color explosions. Varus' spell effects have a good mix of shades and hues here, and they all get to pop substantially with his spell casts. The base character design is, well, it's fine, I guess. I don't think the hood and the high collar are particularly interesting, but the asymmetrical shoulders and the scarf and the neon fringes all the way down the arm to the bow make up for a lot of that. And the bow itself, again, as a base design, is not that interesting, but the interactions that Varus has with it and the way that it animates in the skin are excellent. His Q, the spell you'll probably be casting by far the most, has a great wind-up animation, and when empowered, it becomes absolutely spectacular. I am less a fan of his idle and run animations. To me, they read a little bit awkward, kind of stiff and a little bit clunky, but those are fairly minor blemishes on what is, at a baseline, a pretty darn decent legendary. Did Lux really need another skin? Well, no, absolutely not, but skins will always be a popularity contest, and, well, she's winning. Faerie Court is fairly solid, though. It casts her as an apprentice mage of the Summer Court of Fairies, and whereas the first round of Faerie Court skins has some trouble making their thematic clear in the designs, at least I thought so, Lux does a really good job embodying summer here. The stained glass like butterfly wings in her dress is a gorgeous motif, adding a lot of visual interest to her costuming, and there's some nice play with asymmetry here as well. Thigh-high on her left leg, flowers on the right side of her head, and an earring on only one side. That's all solid design craft. It struggles a bit under Lux's base model and animations, which, while they've held up okay for the last 14 years, are definitely starting to show their age and can't really support the fairy gracefulness of the design in motion. My main criticism is that I would have liked her to look a little bit more like, you know, an apprentice mage, with robes instead of a dress, or a wizard hat made out of flowers, maybe a less ostentatious staff to show her beginner status. There was an opportunity to tell a little bit more story with her character design here, I feel. In hindsight, Soraka is such an obvious fit for the Faerie Court skin line, but the version they've created of her, well, it has its ups and downs. The big thing I like is replacing her unicorn horn with a forked beetle horn. That is absolutely perfect. That's killer, and it's well supported by the insect wings and the jewelry attached to it, giving the vibe of a crown or an elaborate headpiece. It's gorgeous. The rest of the costuming, though, I'm decidedly more lukewarm about. The puffy flower petal sleeves are a nice detail, as are the butterfly wing skirt pieces, but the rest of it doesn't really have much uniqueness to it. And given that Soraka is supposed to be specifically an herbalist in this skin, not a sorcerer, I feel like she needed pouches full of flowers and more outdoorsy gear appropriate for someone who's gathering herbs in the woods. Or just make her staff a walking staff rather than a magic scepter, something. In the pursuit of being pretty, I feel like this design closes out a lot of its opportunities for character building and storytelling, and that's kind of a waste of a setting like Faerie Court, at least in my opinion. There's a lot to like about Faerie Court Lilia. She's of the Winter Court in her skin line's lore, and the design shows this very elegantly by simply giving her a shaggy white coat of fur in her back and her ears and fur lining on her sleeves. Along with the bright blue, cool green, and white color scheme, yeah, that makes a winter fairy if I ever saw one. Her staff looks great here too, resembling a frozen flower with a drop of ice swinging from it, and the little book on her hip is just enough detail to imply her role as an archivist and a library nerd, which is what she is in the lore. On the other hand, she also seems to be wearing pants? Leggings? I don't really know what they are, but she's got them on the bottom half of her dear body, and I really don't understand why. And for all that she's supposed to be winter-themed and cold weather, she also has bare shoulders and a completely naked back, which undercuts the warm fur part of her design completely for no apparent reason. Like, it's not even fan service. This isn't sexy or particularly stylish, so why do that? At a baseline, it's a fun, charming, and cute little skin, but it also doesn't seem to want to actually commit to the ideas that it's putting forward, and that baffles me. Faerie Court Tristana is a goddamn banger. Seriously, this skin is brilliant. The big showpiece of it, of course, is the Firefly jar that she uses as a cannon. That alone is worth the price of admission, in my opinion. That's a killer idea right there. Perfect use and integration of the premise. A 10 out of 10 design conceit. Absolutely no notes. And it's really well supported by the rest of the skin as well. In this skin line, Tristana is a scrappy, plucky quartermaster for the Faerie Court and a self-appointed bodyguard. And so, she has a chaotic, spiky hairstyle arranged in 4 plant-bound pigtails and a mess of flowers and ornaments in her hair, really selling that vibe and energy. She wears a simple breastplate, which is just enough to give her a martial aspect without dragging down the plants and flowers fairy theme, and there's a nice contrast going on between that dark purple suit color, the bright pink hair, and the wings, and her pale blue skin. This skin is just solid character design craft from top to bottom. It's cute, it's pretty, and it has personality. It communicates the story of who this champion is in her setting, and that is the secret sauce that so many other skins are so often missing. Kog'Maw gets the Victoria skin this year, and honestly, I really kind of like it. Now, it is a commemorative skin, and as I pointed out many times before, the main purpose of a commemorative skin isn't really to be good on its own, it's to commemorate a thing. So there isn't much to Victoria's Kog'Maw. There's not really a character here, there's not a story or any big idea or concept to explore, and that is fine, to be clear. It just means the skin has little to recommend it except the baseline appeal of its craft, and Victoria's Kog'Maw has pretty good craft. I like the shape design on his head, the swoop and curve of the bronze metal headpiece, those little ridges that curl around the eyes. I like the sharp organic edges on his carapace, and I think the undersaturated color scheme is quite tasteful for him, actually. He has a general oceanic vibe going on with that dolphin tail and the braided tendrils on his head, and that adds some nice visual interest. It's nothing revolutionary, but the end result is a skin that looks prestigious without ever looking gaudy, a trophy that you can show off without seeming like you're bragging. I think it's good. So apparently this year's crop of Infernal skins generated some backlash for being boring, and I gotta be honest, my immediate reaction to that is, of course they're boring, they're Infernal skins. But you know what, let's not grade on a curve. Infernal skins have always been boring, but they should always also have been better, especially at 1350 RP a pop. Infernal Ashe is a great example of just how mediocre it can get. There's some nice texture work on her cloak and her bow, but the costume is such a f***ing nothing. She's just a generic hot fantasy lady, except she's orange, and if they wanted it to be sexy fanservice, Jesus Christ, then make her fully naked and just covered up with fire, commit to the horny, instead of doing this corny-ass cleavage and camel toe nonsense. Similarly, come on, it must have been possible to replace her basic-ass hair with a billowing flame visual effect, replace her feet with cloven devil hooves, or make her bow continuously drip blobs of molten magma, just anything. It's not just that Infernal skins are repetitive within the skin line, it's that they never seem to make any effort to explore any interesting idea of what fire and lava could be visually, or what it could look like, what could make it cool. It's just boring. Infernal skins have never been great, but this latest batch is especially boring. Fire, flame, and magma are all ideas that are interesting and available for remixing and creative reinterpretation, but Infernal Karma simply isn't interested in trying. It's just Karma, but she's orange. The costuming especially annoys me here because there's just nothing going on. Like, imagine if her clothes were a looping animation of blackened magma rock flowing down her body like a waterfall. Imagine if she was headless with a roaring flame billowing out of her neck instead, framed by the spinning obsidian behind her. Hell, that would even do a little bit of storytelling for her character, because in the lore of Infernal, Karma is a sorcerer who got possessed by hellfire. She metaphorically lost her head in that sense, and like, maybe you could do something with that. But no, orange Karma with some magma textures, that's the best they've got. And I don't get it. Is anyone actually so desperate for a fire-themed Karma skin that they're willing to settle for this? Because this just isn't good enough. I really think both the character and the people who are supposed to pay money for this stuff deserve a lot better. Olaf is probably the best of the new Infernal skins, but let's be honest, that's a low bar to clear. What I appreciate about it is a nice and deliberate use of asymmetry. He has obsidian spikes on one shoulder, not the other. He has a black rock gauntlet on one hand, not the other. The axes are different and distinct from one another. His crown has a broken horn on one side, and it covers one eye like an eye patch. Asymmetry is a good visual shortcut for some visual interest, and it helps to sell the idea of chaos and instability, which is a good match for the flame and lava as a thematic element on him. But I don't want to give it too much credit for just having, basic competent design craft. It does a little bit of storytelling, but ultimately this really is just orange Olaf with better textures and a nicer looking model. He frankly looks way too clean and well groomed to actually embody the idea of a flame berserker, asymmetry or not, so being the best of the new Infernal skins only really amounts to being about as boring as every single other Infernal skin. Does anyone need me to tell them not to buy the new commemorative Faker skin bundle? Riot is charging the equivalent of $500 goddamn dollars for the thing, and you can get a PS5 for that kind of money. You absolutely should not buy it. It's not worth it, it will never be worth it, and Riot are taking the absolute piss here. And don't anyone come at me with, oh, but they're doing revenue share, because first of all, they're not sharing enough, and second of all, it doesn't really matter who gets the money. This is an obscene amount to charge for an in-game cosmetic, and clearly, what Riot is trying to do here is push the boundaries of what they can get away with, either so that they can charge even more for big event skins in the future, or so they can pretend like they took feedback and listened to the community when they dropped the price down to $250 in some pathetic performance of compromise. As for the skin itself, it's a good skin. It has a lot of impressive effects. The color scheme is good. The multi-headed Hydra thing on the tails is an interesting use for Ahri's character design, and the level up mechanics are fun. But Riot are taking the absolute piss here. Do not validate this business strategy with your money. Do not buy this. I've already made my thoughts clear on the $500 absolute taking the piss bullshit that Riot did with the commemorative Immortal Legend Ahri skin, my thoughts being that Riot are absolutely taking the piss with that bullshit, and they were trying to test the waters to see if they could get away with the $250 Jinx Arcane bullshit that they're trying to do now. But I never got around to reviewing the Risen Legend form of Ahri, or the LeBlanc skin that's also here for some reason, so okay, let's talk about them. Not that there's that much to say, mind you. These are commemorative skins, which means their quality is secondary to their function as memorabilia, and as memorabilia, they are fine, I guess. The black and red color scheme is simple, but always a striking palette. There's some nice metal accents that look baseline fine. The costuming is more than a little generic, just structural accents in sharp, artistic, cool-looking shapes, same as you'd find on 100 other skins, but otherwise perfectly fine. Ahri's orb looks nice. The spell effects on both skins are decent. They are good as objects of craft, and if they weren't tied to the $500 bullshit that Riot is trying to get away with, I'd probably bump them up a grade. Hi, sorry to interrupt what you're doing, but if you watch this thing this far, and thank you for sitting through the ads, by the way, I appreciate it, I figure maybe you wouldn't mind if I take just a minute to do a little bit of self-promotion, and also ask you to play a little game. I have a Patreon, I have a merchandise store, and I have a tip jar, and you can find links to all of that in the description. And if you enjoy the shorts that I make and you want to help me pay my editors to help me make them, those are the best ways to support me. If you want to see the shorts and videos on this channel early, you can also become a member of the channel for as little as $1 a month. And while I cannot read all of the many thousands of comments that I get on this channel anymore, I do make it a point to read every comment left by anyone who is a channel member. Speaking of comments, by the way, if you got this far and you sat through this little ad, let's play a game. Leave a watermelon emoji in your comment and I will put a heart on it. And on a related note, if you don't want to give any money to me, that's entirely understandable. And frankly, if you've given me this much of your time, you've kind of given enough already. But maybe consider giving a bit of money this year to Doctors Without Borders or the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. Even a little bit of money can do a lot of good when it's in those hands. Anyway, sorry for the interruption, back to video game cosmetics. You know, after the deeply disappointing Faerie Court launch skin, I was a little worried that Riot wasn't going to know what to actually do with Melio and his peculiar character design. But oh my god, Rain Shepherd, what a perfect little skin. The skin line has some internal lore about drought and rain and singing frogs, but I gotta be honest, I struggle to care about that because look at him in his little froggy rain boots, and his little froggy shorts with his little froggy hat, and his fuimigos are round little cheerful frogs that jump around and do his abilities, and the backpack. Holy shit, the backpack. It's a little froggy house with a sleeping frog on top and a fat one on a pillow and a rain cloud inside. I also do love the color scheme here. The bright, very light blue hair and gloves matching the color of the cloud is great, and it makes a great contrast with his dark skin tone and complements the greens and yellows really nicely, making for a skin with some really appealing value contrasts. This skin is genuinely kind of a masterpiece. What a wonderful little creation. The Rain Shepherd lore, which as far as I can tell isn't that particularly important to the skin line, casts Fizz as basically the villain of the story. More of a trickster and a prankster villain, of course, nothing really nefarious, but still, that's not really the read I get from his character design here, to be honest. While less overwhelmingly adorable than Rain Shepherd Melio, Fizz here is sticking close to the same aesthetic of frog-themed cuteness, with his Lillipad hat with a tiny frog on it, his blushing cheeks, and his amphibian toe boots. Turning his trident into an umbrella is a genuinely very smart design move, and the Totoro-inspired recall animation it enables is genuinely some of the cutest animation in the entire game. Like, seriously, look how sweet this is. I like his overalls, too, and the way that his head tentacles are dressed up as floating pond leaves. That's clever, and really reinforces the idea of him as someone who lurks just under the surface of the water to launch a prank on someone passing by. On a broader level, also, I'm happy that Fizz is getting a skin that's focused on making him cute and charming rather than some flavor of cool or scrappy, which almost all of his other skins do. This is a really solid, really appealing little cosmetic. The splash art for Battle Dove Seraphine has been nagging at me ever since I first saw it, because while the technical level of execution is as high as Riot skins always are, something about the composition here, the values, the lighting, it just makes it fall completely flat and feel boring and lifeless to me. The skin itself, though, is pretty decent, fortunately. Casting Seraphine is essentially a dove-themed superhero. It turns her long hair into folded bird wings, which unfurl when she uses particularly powerful abilities, and that works quite well for her animation. Her stage platform is also appropriately bird-themed, bridging the gap between her base pop star persona and the idea of a songbird superhero. Her costume design, though, leaves something to be desired, being a fairly generic tight-fitting spandex suit and a crop top jacket straight out of her KDA wardrobe. There are attempts to bird theme it with some slight feather motifs slapped on here and there, but it's just not nearly enough. It's not fun enough, not colorful and flamboyant enough to match her character, and it feels like they could have done a lot more to bring her animal theme into her costume design. To be fair, though, this is a problem that all of the new Anima Squad skins kind of share a little bit. I mostly really like Primordian Belveth. I like her colors, her texture work looks really cool, I like her horn and the big regal halo behind her head, and I like the visual effects on her wings and body, mimicking the bioluminescence of deep-sea creatures. She does look like a terrifying sea monster monarch leading the forces of the Primordians to overwhelm the last bastion of humanity. She does look like a good villain for Anima Squad. But then there's the face. Like, base Belveth has a human face because of the way that the Void and Runeterra both hates, but also desperately mimics reality and life. It serves a storytelling function. It tells you something about who she is in the way that she presents herself. But in the Anima Squad universe, there's just nothing in her lore or her role that implies the need or desire for a human face or a false facade. She's a tactician who wants to usurp Aatrox. She has no particular fascination with humanity or desire to mimic them. The face could have been anything: a mermaid's scaly head, a strange deep-sea creature poking out of her body, I don't know, a toothed maw. The beautiful, clearly human face that she's been stuck with here feels more like it was put in by default than out of any creative consideration for her character. Cybercat Yuumi is a cute little idea. She's the sentient AI running the computer systems for Anima Squad, and the visual effects that are being used to make her look holographic do a solid job of selling that fantasy for her. The problem is they're the only thing selling that fantasy. First of all, she's still riding Book, who is unmistakably still, a book, and I just can't help but feel like, surely that should have been a laptop or a folding phone, just anything that looks more technological, and the actual design of her body doesn't seem interested at all in taking any kind of a tech angle on her. She just looks like a normal cat who's blue with pink and purple accents around her fringe. All of her shape language, despite the high-tech conceit, is still very much stuck in Yuumi's baseline cozy fantasy aesthetic rather than the animal-themed futuristic high-tech of Anima Squad. And like, her lore says that she was repurposed from a Primordian program, so if you don't want to go tech with her, why not design her to look more like a Primordian sea monster? Tell the story of the character. In isolation, this skin is very cute and appealing, but as a piece of storytelling, which is something that Anima Squad ostensibly wants to do with its characters, it falls really flat for me. The Prestige version of Cybercat Yuumi replaces her holographic AI visual effects with shiny, sparkly crystal glitters, and honestly, that's quite pretty. Prestige skins should be ostentatious and kinda loud, and I like the implementation of these effects here. It feels appropriately too much without being actually too much. The Prestige, unfortunately, does inherit base Cybercat's problem that Book is still obviously very much a book. It tries to reskin it into a luxurious floating pillow, but not very successfully, I think. It's one of those inevitable problems that happens when all of Book's animation is based on actually being a book. For the most part, this Prestige skin does the job that it's supposed to do, which is to be pretty, but like the base form, it can't quite make Yuumi look like a technological cyberpet. Her yellow, fuzzy tail kind of interferes with the geometric crystal aesthetic that the rest of her design is going for, and it feels a little messy in a way that I don't think the skin's concept can support. I do like the crown on her head, though, and the extremely smug expression on her face. That is some good kitty cat charm. The thing about Primordian Rek'Sai is that she just doesn't look that important or unique or interesting, and that's a good thing. In the lore of Anima Squad, Rek'Sai is a tunneling kaiju battering ram, undermining and attacking the walls and defenses of Final City to start the conquest. She is, narratively speaking, a big, scary, dangerous monster that the heroes have to fight, but not a main villain or a final boss. And so, appropriately, she looks like there could be 100 more just like her lurking offshore, waiting to charge in for the final battle, and her design has very little unique personality or memorability. She just looks like part of a horde, and that's exactly what she's supposed to be. So even if that perhaps means that the skin in isolation isn't particularly interesting as a character design, narratively, it makes it a big success. And you know what? Even in isolation, it's not like the skin is actually bad looking. The blue and purple color scheme is well balanced, the mix of sea life with cybernetic tech is good, her tail and her fin look appropriately lethal, and I really like the bone white design on her face mask. That just looks really cool and menacing. It's all just really solid design work, and it has good storytelling to boot. I'm in a bit of two minds about Admiral Battle Bunny Misfortune, because on the one hand, this is a rare drop skin capsule extra special limited cosmetic, and the main purpose of those is to be something extra appealing and kind of over the top, so that this version harkens very strongly back to the Playboy Bunny fan service roots of the skin line. I mean, yeah, sure, that does make a certain degree of sense. Battle Bunny Misfortune is a reasonable character to do fan service with, and with a corset and that body-stocking jumpsuit and thigh-high boots, she delivers that fan service without going so much over the top that it becomes leering or gratuitous. On the other hand, this is supposed to be the Admiral of the Anima Squad. Like, she's supposed to be a battlefield commander, a war leader, the last bastion of security for a frightened city under siege, a leader who hides her worries about the disappearance of her predecessor under an air of effortless command. And that just isn't what the costume is presenting here at all. If this was her post-victory party celebration outfit, yeah, absolutely, that would make sense. If it was her casual wear, sure, or an outfit for a date night with Alawi or something, that would be fine, but making it the Admiral's uniform? That just doesn't work. My main criticism of BattleBat Zaya is I think more could be done with the animal theme, but that's a criticism I have pretty broadly with the Anima Squad skins because the costuming gets kinda cosplay generic to me sometimes. I wish they'd take a little bit more of a Monster Hunter approach when it comes to incorporating animal parts into fashion and armor, because most of the actual outfits tend to be vaguely generic futuristic tech jumpsuit stuff. It really lacks that animal theming. Setting that aside, I actually really like this skin. The big collar makes a great silhouette. I really like her bat wings, especially in motion and during her ult. I think the high contrast bright blue and dark purple and black makes for a solid color scheme that pops. I think her hairstyle strikes a good balance between being anime style over elaborate without being so fancy as to look weird on a no-nonsense frontliner, and I'm a sucker for a good military style cap with an insignia on the front. Those are just cool. My final nitpick, and it is a nitpick, the skin is good, is I kind of wish her makeup looked different. Like, if you're gonna do a full face of makeup on a militaristic style superhero character, I think it should be bold and aggressive, not restrained and vague like this is, but yeah, well. In her base design, Aurora is designed extremely specifically to be a witch. With her hat and her wand, it's about as witchy as costuming gets. In the Anima Squad universe, however, she's supposed to be a bioengineering PhD research scientist, and those two vibes kind of end up clashing. The vast majority of her costuming here is excellent, though. She has the big white lab coat, she has science vials strapped to her hips and her legs, she has safety goggles, and even her wand is somewhat plausibly reskinned to be some kind of science probe doodad, although I think they could have gone a little bit harder on that, to be honest. The absolute best detail, though, is that she's wearing comfy bunny slippers, because yeah, that's accurate to every PhD I have ever known. And honestly, I kind of wish she was wearing like pajama pants as well, like she's only dressing up her top half to get on a Zoom call. That would be a cool kind of vibe. But then there's the hat. It's a witch's hat, and it feels like a clashing intrusion of fantasy aesthetics to a design that isn't supposed to be about that. It's supposed to be like a dead Primordian monster shell, which is a good idea, but in practice, it is a witch's hat. A fantasy, magic, cottage in the wood witch's hat, and it clashes with the sci-fi. Silhouette be damned, I think it needed to be altered more than this. I feel a bit in two ways about Primordian Aatrox. On the one hand, for being the big bad, the final boss of the Anima Squad storyline this year, he's kind of missing a little bit of riz, right? He's missing a little bit of that demon lord dignity and over-elaborate fanciness that you kind of need in a final boss. Like, ultimately, he looks more like one more monster than he looks like the ultimate super monster. He lacks a truly special, unique feature that sets him definitively apart from the other Primordians. That said, though, as a villain, he is more of a raging berserker than a smooth-talking mastermind, and for that, his design does kind of fucking slap, actually. When his ult replaces his smooth-featured, handsome face for the mouth of Sauron, he even becomes genuinely kind of scary. His color scheme is simple but effective, lots of aggressive glowing red burning against the cooler blues and teals of the Primordian color scheme, and he has veins glowing inside his sword arm, a snapping primordial mouth on his shoulder, sleek, aggressively sharp wings, and a sword which is itself a Primordian monster complete with a toothy mouth that he swings around as a weapon. He doesn't quite look like the level of supervillain that I would want him to be, but he looks damn good nonetheless. Primordian Briar is one of those skins I can't quite make my mind up about. Her story is that she's a failed Primordian science experiment. She was supposed to be like Aatrox, but developed an accidental curiosity about humans instead of just murderous bloodlust. She has escaped to join Anima Squad instead. She's sort of an Ariel from the Little Mermaid riff. She wants to be where the people are and so on, but she's a version of Ariel that sometimes might eat people, which is an interesting way to go with that. And okay, cool, that all works, I get it, but then what's with the costuming? If she's a discarded, messed up Primordian science experiment lashed to a pillory and abandoned, well, where is that in her design? There's no element of experimental biology here, no mutations, no surgical stitches, no visual indicators that she's an engineered or artificial beings, or indeed that she's neglected or cast aside by her society. She just kinda looks like a normal person wearing a Primordian costume. On the other side of the coin, her desire to be in the human world is also kind of missing from the design itself. Like, I wish she was wearing at least some Anima Squad gear to indicate that that's her affiliation, especially some Anima Squad gear that stands out from her base design and contrasts with it to highlight the difference between who she is and what she's chosen to be. That would do something to tell the story of that part of her. The obvious opportunity is to replace her crop top jacket or her shoes with tech white Anima Squad aesthetics, or hell, make her pillory a piece of Anima Squad gear that they created to help her control her bloodlust so she can fit into human society. As it is, all of her costuming is just Primordian, with no indication of her decision to live life a different way. The story concept behind her is really fun and I like it, but absent either visual indications that she's hated and neglected and rejected by the Primordians, or visual indication that she's loved and accepted by Anima Squad, none of it comes through or does anything for her design, and she just, again, kinda looks like a person in a Primordian costume. The counterpoint to all of those criticisms, though, is that her frenzy form really kind of slaps. Her entire face becomes this devouring maw at the end of her throat, like some predatory tube worm, with solid black armor plates over her eyes, dehumanizing her and sprouting her hair like the crown of an anemone, all lit up in bioluminescent angry red. Like, what a fantastic way to transform her into a monster. I think they could go a little harder on it, have her legs and arms get more armored and monstrous too when she goes frenzy mode, but at a baseline, the frenzy form looks really cool and makes for a fantastic and appealing contrast with her cutesy base form. So I'm a bit in two minds here. On the one hand, I think the storytelling kind of really fails her pretty badly. On the other hand, goddamn, but she does look cool though. I missed a few of the Anima Squad skins earlier in the year, so let's review them now. Starting with Yasuo, because according to the lore, Yasuo is a hard-bitten veteran who fought in the first waves of the Primordian invasion before vanishing mysteriously, only to turn up years later still wearing his original suit, warning the squad of terrible things to come. And I'm sorry, was the lore writer even talking to the artists while coming up with this? This man looks like a concierge at a sci-fi furry convention. He looks like he just stepped out of a weirdly kinky cocktail party. He's wearing a suit, vest, and tie. Many things come to mind when I see Yasuo with dog ears and furry feet, but hard-bitten survivalist bringing a desperate warning of doom is not one of them. Setting that aside, I mean, it is Yasuo with dog ears and furry feet, so it's definitely gonna make someone happy if that's the intent, and hey, fair enough. But as an expression of the sci-fi elite monster hunter squad fighting back the apocalypse premise of Anima Squad, it's pretty weak, honestly. Like, my guy does not look like a fighter or a warrior of any kind, and in fact, I'm not really sure what he's supposed to look like in the context of Anima Squad at all. This is pretty bad character design and storytelling, but hey, it's gonna make a cool cosplay for someone. Moving on to Battle Bear Illaoi, and she's got a little bit more going for her as a design. She's very much the big sister of the team in lore, or a big sister at the very least. There's a lot of family dynamics going on there, and as a design, she does carry some of that vibe with her jacket casually slung around her waist and pink color scheme and cheerful bear imagery. There's a softness to her here that works really well contrasted against the sharp feet claws and fierce bear idol. This design does look like an athletic, workout-obsessed, and tough with a heart of gold sci-fi anime superhero. It nails that vibe, even if it's pretty basic as costuming goes. Like, it's more or less just an athletic swimsuit. Her tentacles being reskinned as pink and yellow slabby bear paws is an adorable feature, though. I really like that. The most successful skin we're going to talk about, though, is Battle Lion Leona. She's the team mom of Anima Squad, proud lioness of her pride, quite literally, and to that end, she has a big wild ponytail and that shock of bright yellow around her shoulders from the jacket to play the visual part of a mane. Pair that with a giant lion-faced shield and a fiery orange and yellow primary color scheme that contrasts with the pale white and placid teal of her weapons, and you've got a design that very effectively implies the duality of sensible team leader on the one hand and passionate battle lion on the other, which is exactly what the character design is meant to express. It strikes a really solid balance between being cutesy and being fierce, and even on Leona's very aged model, it manages to look modern and cool. I wish it was a legendary so it could have animations to match, but this skin kind of rules, honestly. Which is more than I can say for the Prestige version, which, I mean, I know this is supposed to be high fashion, and that's not my area, admittedly, but what is this? What's this supposed to be? Booty shorts, thigh highs, a crop top jacket, and coattails. Like, I didn't know it was possible to be overdressed and underdressed at the same time, but here we are, I guess. Mostly, I just have no earthly idea what she's even trying to dress for. It looks like she's dressed for Malibu Beach, an anime convention, and the Met Gala at the same time, and that's just genuinely baffling. Also, that sunglasses visor doesn't really look super great on her, to be honest. I missed reviewing these skins when they first came out, so let's talk about the T1 World Champion skins. Like most esports skins, trying to review the T1 skins is in some ways kind of pointless. They are commemorative. They are meant to recall an event and honor a player much more than they're meant to be artistically compelling on their own merits. So T1 Jinx is visually kind of a mess, way too much detail competing for attention on way too little space. Ditto T1 Orianna, who has devil horns for no discernible reason absent the context. And Lee Sin's costuming can't seem to decide if it wants to be badass or sexy, but if that's how the players wanted the skins to be, then these things aren't really flaws. T1 Jace has a certain clean Thunder God aesthetic going on, which I actually kind of like, even if I think the Prestige version looks like absolute cheese. But the highlight and easily the best skin of the whole bunch is T1 Bard, for the simple reason that the bunny mask and ears and the little bunny meeps brings a ton of personality and charm to the design that elevate it just a bit beyond being merely a commemorative souvenir for an esports tournament. Battle Queen came back in 2024, so let's take a look and see if they're any good. And, well, Battle Queen Misfortune is about a 7 out of 10 as a skin can get. It changes her from an ocean pirate to a sky pirate, and layers some knightly high fantasy court aesthetics over her with frills, lace, and an armored bustier, finishing off the outfit with a big fancy hat and a big fancy feather. It looks mostly great, but then her outdated model with its stiff animations and cartoonishly oversized guns undercuts it all by not quite being able to carry off the dignified vibe that it's going for. It's the textbook definition of competent design within the limits of what a model can do, a perfect 7 out of 10, or a B, if you prefer. Meanwhile, if I have a critique of Battle Queen Gwen, first, it's that she looks a little bit too much like she belongs in the Heartseeker universe with the Valentine's Day skins, and second, you could have done a lot more with her skirt. Gwen is like the skirt champion. It's a huge part of her design and animation, and in a line like Battle Queen, I feel like there's a real missed opportunity here to go all out with a truly spectacular, multi-layered, complex, decorated statement piece of a skirt. Instead, this is generally a rather stripped back skin as a costume, reaching more for stylization than decoration, which isn't bad per se, just a little bit disappointing in this case. Setting that aside, her combat scissors look great here, her color scheme is solid, and I like the asymmetry of her hair and its ribbon. It gives her a little bit of a crooked personality. This is a fine skin, I just can't help but feel like it could have been so much more. Moving on, Battle Queen Fiora's flower eye patch is the killer feature of this skin. First of all, what a lovely bit of storytelling to show visually that this woman has fought lethal battles and lived. Second of all, what a badass way to do a missing eye and eye patch as a design feature. Badass, but also being a flower, perfectly aligned with the highly feminine fantasy warrior queen base aesthetic of the skin line. The bright red and orange of the flower against the otherwise blue, gray, and white of her outfit makes it stand out, and the relative wildness of its shape contrasts beautifully with the I am the very picture of poise and control costuming of the rest of the design. This is a fantastic application of Fiora's base character design to tell a very different character story. Finally though, much like Gwen, Annie feels a little bit underdressed for the concept here. Her outfit is cute, but it feels like there was an opportunity here to lean even more into Lolita fashion styles, that's what they're called by the way, don't at me, and play with expressive decorativism. Instead, it's kept fairly simple, just a green dress and a pink ribbon with some brass armor pieces. Even the hair feels a little bit underdone here relative to how complex and elaborate you could make it within the visual style of the skin line. I do like the tiny little sword slung across her back that is kind of adorable, but the big problem with this skin is Tibbers, because Tibbers just kinda sucks, like straight up. He's supposed to be a living knight armor mixed with a teddy bear in its aesthetic, and I'm sorry, this is just a generic MMO monster. There's nothing tying him to Annie, nothing connecting him to Battle Queen, nothing to make him look like a child's beloved toy brought to life. He has no personality, no charm, and Annie deserves a much better knight than this. The God King Garen and Darius skins were, if not super innovative, at least somewhat interesting because they both try to express something about the character of the champions that they are for. Garen is both this shining light of justice and order and a hyper-repressive stick-up-the-ass ultra-authoritarian. Darius is both a liberator and a breaker of false hierarchies and a social Darwinist might-makes-right hyper-individualist asshole. The divine God King and fallen God King skins, on the other hand, with all the creative verve and bravery of a boardroom full of Disney executives, dare to ask the subversive question, what if the one that had all the dark colors now had the light colors instead? And what if the one that had the light colors, now he was dark? And truly, the world shakes to be confronted with such bold and hitherto unseen aesthetic innovation. My point is, this shit is unbearably boring to me. This is the artistic equivalent of TV static. If the surface coolness of the aesthetics appeals to you, I mean, good for you, I guess, and I hope you had a good time grinding out all the capsules it takes to unlock them. I just cannot force myself to even pretend like I give a damn about either of these. Just think, if Riot hadn't killed Riot Forge, we could have had a Phoenix Wright-style visual novel lawyer game about Azir and Xerath having catty court battles as bitter exes and rivals, and oh, I made myself sad about Forge again. Attorney Azir's soldiers are legal assistants, his ultimate shield wall is judges, and his Sundisk turrets are scales of justice loaded with paperwork. His staff is an ink pen, and his streamers are memos held on with paper clips and sticky tape, and he's got a badge on his chest with the logo of his own law firm. Joke skins only work when they're really committing to the bit, and oh my god, does this one commit. There's some awkwardness, of course. Azir's feet were never really meant to wear shoes, so his walk looks a little bit wonky, and the suit doesn't 100% work with his silhouette, but I love his little red half-moon glasses and the beautiful smooth shape of the crest on his head and the long eyebrows. It makes him look sharp and attentive in a way that really supports the concept and enhances the sense of character that we get here. This looks like a nightmare to deal with in court. What a lovely little skin. On the one hand, I kind of feel like Janitor the Thresh should have used his human form as much as I generally dislike it, because it would be funny to see a smug, evil, sexy man working as a janitor. On the other hand, Thresh's big green skull-faced demon body has so much contrast with the janitor outfit, it's just kind of funny on the face of it. And honestly, if they had used his human form, I don't think people would have been even half as horny as they have become for this skin, and that is even funnier. As a joke skin, it's also conceptually really kind of clever to make his hook into a squeegee and his lantern into a bucket of soapy water with a rubber ducky floating in it. That's a delightful use of his base design to accomplish something new. And I really like the cap and the headphones as a piece of silhouette on his normally bare skull head. It really adds something. Ditto the white t-shirt and the black suspenders with a half-unzipped boiler suit. As costume design goes, there's just a lot of nice contrast and detail here. This is a really good joke, executed really, really well, and what more could you possibly ask for from a skin like this? I missed some skin reviews in 2024, so let's wrap them up before the year is out. Let's talk about Victoria's Tryndamere and Sona, and World's Viego. And we'll start with Viego. World's skins are, of course, first and foremost, commemorative, like souvenirs that you buy on holiday, and their main purpose is to remind you of an occasion, and whether or not they are strictly good is kind of a secondary concern. And that's a good thing, too, because World's 2024 Viego really isn't that great. Or, well, the splash art is pretty good, actually. The artist is clearly playing very deliberately with color, keeping most of the image grayscale to make the gold and the blue really pop, and this isn't a bad way to use Viego's pale and undead base color scheme for the purpose. Viego's costuming is a little bit incoherent, but it works in a carefully posed splash art where it can look eccentric rather than just, messy. Not so much on the model, though, unfortunately, where Viego's sullen emo boy posture does a substantially worse job of flattering the costume. Here, the lopsided fur collar interacts awkwardly with his hunchback posing, the frilly cravat and complicated jacket design just turns into visual noise, and while the grayscale with saturated colors worked in the splash art, on the in-game model, the colors are so turned down and everything below Viego's waist is so gray and desaturated that the contrast is basically non-existent. The crown, which itself looks a little bit silly, just perched on top of his head like a toy like it is, almost vanishes now into his yellow blonde hair because, of course, if they'd made the hair pure white like it is in the splash art, then the hair would have vanished into the fur and the collar and his pure white face. This skin just kind of looks drab and a little bit depressive, and that's not quite the vibe that you would want for something that's meant to celebrate the biggest esports event of the year. Moving on, the Victoria skins are similar to the World skin in that these are also commemorative, proof positive that their owner was winning games in Season 14. And honestly, I think they're really well pitched for that purpose. There is something quite classy, at least to me, in the understated color scheme that's working here. Sona, for example, is mostly clad in dark brown and almost black, and her instrument is rendered in this dull but quite ornate and shapely brass. It's fancy without being loud, and that is complemented by a fairly dark purple color tone for the hair, which gives room for the almost iridescent streamers and the feather structures on her dress to act as a bright, beautiful highlight. Ditto, for the most part, Tryndamere, whose costuming is decidedly rustic, heavy leather and fur as befits a barbarian king, but never shabby. It's all high quality and it looks like craftsmanship. His hair is, yes, a little bit wild, but it's also styled back and cut in layers and has a beautifully structured braid running through it, complementing that well-groomed facial hair. And finally, the blade, which appropriately should be the showy part of a Tryndamere design, gets to have a bright purple color and a bright gradient to grab attention. I do wish he had a few more battle scars to really imply a long history of fighting and winning hard battles, but there is a sense of kingly dignity in the design here that I really like. Both of these skins are fancy in their way, but never gaudy. They show off, but they aren't trying too hard. They're not exciting, but I find them refreshing in that restraint. It would have been easy to slather them in gold and crystal and shiny gems, but I like this approach a lot better. So, Fright Night Zeri kinda rules. At the concept level, to start with, it makes perfect sense to run a Frankenstein's monster riff with a champion whose main power is electricity plus science gizmo. Those things just fit well together. And beyond the concept, the execution is fantastic as well. Like the rest of Fright Night, we're operating with a definitely not Nightmare Before Christmas aesthetic, but it is unusually well applied here, and I especially appreciate the messiness of this skin. Her lab coat is all stitches and tears and rips, her leggings aligned with scribbles, her glasses are chunky and asymmetrical, and she goes full Frankenfran, shout out to you if you know that reference, with the thick, heavy bolts on her head and her gun. The design rejects sleekness, it rejects smoothness and minimalism, and even her hair gets to look messy and frizzy. She's by no means ugly, mind you, there's some cleavage action going on here, but the design isn't about just being pretty or sexy or cool or baseline appealing, and that is a big strength here. Between the roughness of the textures, the messiness of hair and costume, and that one desiccated ghoul hand she has, the skin feels like it's trying to show you an interesting character, not just a beautiful. And even the prestige version is letting a little bit of a freak flag fly, kitting her out in full Monster High fashion, very much running an early 2000s goth chic playbook. Uniquely among prestige skins though, the Fright Night aesthetic hasn't simply been smoothed out to fit with the prestige glitz and glam crystal look, but the textures retain a lot of the mess and the scribbles that define the base skin line, and I really like that. Her leggings still look kinda woolly and ratty, the dress still has hatching for the texture, the hair is still rendered with dark graphic lines, and she's even got some nice cell-shaded pillow shadows baked into her face texture that gives her a chunky sense of volume that prestige skins usually tend to avoid. Honestly, this might be the best and most interesting prestige skin in the entire game because it makes a clearly conscious effort to engage with the artistic ideas of the base skin line instead of simply overriding them. Fright Night got another round of skins in 2024, so let's take a look at them. The legendary Veigar is mostly just fine. He has some genuinely fantastic voice work and some spectacular new animations. If you want to have a fun time, watch them in super slow motion and just enjoy the squash and stretch. It's clear to me, though, that they deliberately went for simplicity here, as Veigar is supposed to be an Are You Afraid of the Dark style scary campfire story demon accidentally summoned by luckless campers, so he's equal parts creepy and a little bit silly in the way that Veigar often has to be with his proportions. This all makes for technically solid character design, but it's also a little bit unspectacular. It feels like he's missing a big, striking, eye-catching feature that would really put him over the top as a must-have legendary skin. Pyke, meanwhile, just kind of sucks, actually. I'm sorry, but this just doesn't work. He's supposed to be a creature from the Black Lagoon-style monster moonlighting as a demented pool lifeguard, and while the splash art looks good, in-game he's just kind of a mess. A big part of the problem is that the skin has no idea what to do with his shark jaw shoulder armor. It's an incredibly evocative part of his base design, but here it becomes just some red claws on his shoulder that don't do anything for his design and mostly just get in the way and make him harder to read. They seem to be there only out of obligation to the silhouette. The mostly monochrome color scheme struggles to communicate the fishman design concept, and his scaly skin texture can't make up the difference with that don't starve textured smiley oogie boogie cloak on his back, which why would a fishman even wear that? This skin is a cool idea in theory, but in practice it just doesn't work. Shaco, on the other hand, joins Fright Night as someone's Nightmare Before Christmas / Hell of a Boss crossover OC, and honestly, that kinda works for him. It's an approach that massively overloads his design with excessive detail, but the simple black and white and purple color scheme actually makes it pop by being very careful about choosing which bits to highlight. He looks credibly like an escaped reject from the workshop of Henry Selick, or like the main character of a popular webcomic you've never heard of that pulls 6 figures on Patreon. He has that personal OC with a professional budget charm about him, although Riot does not get to say ever again about preserving character silhouette after slapping that hat and those horns on Shaco's character model. Which leads us on to the stars, the crowning jewels of this year's Fright Night skins, which are Nunu and Willump. Oh my god, these two. They are a halfway mix of Little Nemo and Slumberland with a Kingdom Hearts Heartless. They are literally a boy and the monster under his bed, and that is just an absolutely perfect concept to execute with these two characters in particular. Using a glowing icy blue as the single color for this skin helps it really pop with powerful contrast, and that blue combined with a spiral inside Willump's mouth makes the ultimate look genuinely amazing and credibly kinda scary, actually. And Willump strikes that balance in general. He's creepy, but not malevolent or evil, and Nunu in his pajamas with his mommy's special boy bow tie has a ton of weirdo urchin energy. It makes sense that he's the kind of kid who would make a friend out of a monster. And then, of course, there's the bed on Willump's back with a plushie of his base skin that Nunu sleeps with, which, come on, how could you not be charmed by that? A good Nunu and Willump skin has to present a good character dynamic between the two of them, and this skin's recall, where Nunu hides from Willump under the bed, is an animation masterclass in how to establish such a relationship. I want a movie about these two going on adventures. They are so charming. So, number 1, does the model for Genesis Nightbringer Yasuo look better than base Nightbringer Yasuo? Yes, absolutely. It's a low bar, but yeah, this is an upgrade with a much more interesting set of color contrasts, much better detailing on the body, and a much less awkward set of proportions. The horns and hair are still comically oversized for the character, but the balance is much better. Instead, it loses much of what made Nightbringer Yasuo artistically interesting. Like, compare the smoky, demonic fire and brimstone devil out of hell splash art of the original to the posturing D-tier anime villain of the Genesis version, and it's absolutely no contest on this one. The original looks like an angel of hell, a primordial biblical evil coming to blanket the world in darkness, and this looks like the generic demon lord character in a shitty isekai where the protagonist bought their cheat abilities with a credit card. Which isn't a surprise, frankly. The original Dawnbringer and Nightbringer skins, flawed and commercial though they were, had an artistic direction. Genesis Nightbringer Yasuo, on the other hand, is artless gotcha glitter trash, all frosting and no cake, designed exclusively to exploit money out of the wallets of whales. Literally the only way a skin like music fan Gragas works is if it doesn't present him as just an ugly joke. And this is the struggle of a lot of Gragas skins, because being an ugly, disgusting joke is the basis of his whole original character design. A half-naked, alcohol-slobbering, filthy, disgusting blob burping and belly-flopping his way around a battlefield. Music fan strikes the balance by giving him a well-groomed beard with a bit of hair dye and properly manicured hands. It scales back his proportions to be much less grotesque, and dresses him in high-quality looking KDA merch with a well-coordinated color scheme. There's only so much you can do with his grotesque base proportions, of course, but this skin goes out of its way to present Gragas as someone it would be fun to go to a concert with, and so, it works. It becomes fun and celebratory, and makes Gragas here feel like a person rather than just a caricature. It's really nice. Cosplayer Nico should not have her face visible. That's really the big flaw here. If she's supposed to be playing someone attending a fan event in full chonk cosplay, then the suit's head should be a proper fursuit head, not this theme park mascot thing. I really do mean it that I think this is a real flaw. I think it undercuts the premise of the whole skin, but it's also really the only flaw here. The stitches being visible on the suit is adorable, the Talker backpack is a perfect accessory, the Poro crop top is an adorable fit for her, and the way that the tail and the legs have been handled has an absolute perfect balance between elegant and awkward. A big suit costume like this could play havoc with a character's animations, but care has clearly been taken to make all of this work with Nico's movement, and it looks really charming in motion, especially the recall. I really like that one. So yeah, I really do think it should have been a proper fursuit head, but that's the only real problem. This is a pretty good skin. You know, right, if you're gonna make a skin's name this bloody difficult to pronounce, it shouldn't be for a skin this unspectacular. And Sivir, to be fair, does kind of seem like it's going for something downplayed and chill on purpose. It casts Sivir as basically an average League of Legends fan, the kind of person you'd see walking the floor at any esports game or fan event, a BlizzCon attendee in Riot swag, basically, and yeah, I can see the point of that. A skin that's also a very attainable cosplay, that's not a terrible idea at all, and I would be lying if I pretended that making her weapon into the missing ping isn't kind of funny. Not laugh out loud haha funny, but funny. It's a cheerful little thing. I do think it could have done with a little bit more decoration, like, I don't know, a Tibber's backpack or some kind of Poro print on her knee socks or some more buttons and pins on her jacket. It feels a little bit bare bones visually still, but as a celebration of a relatively ordinary kind of League of Legends fan, yeah, this is pretty fine. Esports fan Trundle is easily the worst of the anniversary skins, because, like, what exactly about this is supposed to look like an esports fan? They basically just painted some in-game symbols onto some random spots on the character and slapped him in a bizarre pants and crop top jacket arrangement, which I don't think I've ever seen in the crowd on an esports broadcast. Where Sivir managed to capture the casual, down-to-earth vibes of a regular fan quite well, this to me just looks cheap and kind of bizarre. The only real idea this skin seems to have is turning Trundle's club into those light-up inflatable applause sticks that they do hand out at esports events, but after that, the creativity just seems to have run out. Like, he's just wearing a LoL esports branded jacket, that's it. I guess that's all it takes to be an esports fan. I get that they can't slap team branding on a skin like this for legal reasons, but like, then choose a different concept for the anniversary, because as a concept, this is basically nothing. I'm gonna start my review of the new Darkstar skins on a positive note, because Zoe is not only the best of the new skins, she's the best in the whole damn skin line. Darkstar skins are supposed to be embodiments of entropy and the inevitable death and decay of all things, but in practice, they often fail to really embody the idea of chaos, universal destruction, or cosmic horror. Zoe, though, holy shit. On this model, her body is half falling apart itself, her golden crests are disintegrating, her chest is ripped open to show a consuming star swirling inside of it, and her face, which wears a horrible toothless gash instead of a smile, is half torn off of her head. Add to that the asymmetric eyes, the jagged skirt, and the debris of broken planets floating in her streaming hair, and God damn, this skin genuinely goes pretty f***ing hard. This is Darkstar expressed as something genuinely terrifying. A child-faced avatar of inevitable destruction, literally disintegrating as she laughs and dooms the world you live on to destruction. That is pretty freaking good character design. Dark Cosmic Diana has like one interesting visual idea, which is the idea of shattering her golden cosmic skin ornaments to show a break between her and their ordered idealism. The trouble is that this idea is applied in exactly one place on her right shoulder, a little tiny bit, and then it's completely dropped in favor of just being a normal cosmic skin except purple. Cosmic skins are already kind of overexposed and repetitive, and Diana here doesn't really do anything to innovate on the formula. It's a generic fantasy lady in generic fantasy gear of the kind that you could see in any of 100 mobile games or half-forgotten also-ran grindfest MMOs. I like the transparency effects on the hair, that's pretty cool, and the tiny black hole floating over her forehead is at least a cute and magical looking detail, but there's just nothing really here. There's no compelling visual idea. There's nothing that pushes any kind of an envelope. It's just really boring. It hardly even feels worth criticizing. If Dark Cosmic Diana actually looked like her splash art, I think this skin would kind of slap, actually, but Diana's in-game model just isn't quite up to the task of rendering this skin. That smooth transition from the shoulder into the shoulder pad gets broken up. The beautiful golden collar disappears as a texture into a skin tone. The red and orange glow on her hands doesn't quite nail the feeling of translucency that they're supposed to have, and the body-hugging, swirling cut down the thighs can't quite accentuate her motion like it's supposed to, because Diana doesn't do a cutty red carpet stride in League of Legends. She runs hunched over forwards, and she doesn't stand like a statuesque diva. She has a bent-kneed stance that really doesn't work with the heels that they've put on her. Similarly, the makeup that invests her with so much disdainful attitude in the splash art just doesn't come off on the model. It doesn't really look like anything with attitude, and the floating black hole accessory has to be awkwardly stapled to her head motion, wiggling around mechanically rather than flow and accentuate how she's moving. When Diana gets a visual update, this skin might genuinely serve one day, but for now, it only really works in the splash. Darkstar Kai'Sa isn't the worst of the new Darkstar skins, only because I really genuinely kinda hate the Sylas one, but also, what the f*** are we doing here? I genuinely don't understand. What person looks at the Darkstar skins, the skin line that's all about presenting champions as these solar system-sized embodiments of uncaring cosmic entropy, what person who's in the market for that skin is also going to look at Kai'Sa and go, oh, I won't buy that unless she's an attractive human woman with makeup on her face? Like, for whom is that a priority with Darkstar skins? I can understand other kinds of skins, plenty of skin lines, sure. I can see how they sell better if it's a pretty woman wearing them, but Darkstar? This is like ordering a fine Kobe beefsteak and then being like, I won't eat this unless it's covered in powdered sugar and sprinkles. Like, whose taste is this? Design problems aside, with the mask especially, this skin looks fine at a baseline. I like the asymmetry, I like the broken rocky body, it looks generally okay. I just don't understand who needs a Darkstar skin to have a pretty face. Like, whose taste is this? Darkstar Sylas sucks. I can imagine such a cool Darkstar monstrosity from his design, whipping around chains that steal entire planets, dragging them through the cosmos behind his own shattered form of cosmic dust and planetary fragments, held together by the gravity of black holes, and the skin almost gestures towards that cooler idea, hinting at the concept of Sylas's face being an empty facade, a mask floating passively in space. But is that actually implemented on his model? Of course it isn't. There, he's a smirking, dancing, peacocking fuckboy, primarily animated and designed to be a thirst trap, or at least to be someone who thinks that he's a thirst trap. And it's fine, Sylas can have thirst trap skins, there's nothing wrong with that, but why would anyone want that from Darkstar? This skin line is about overwhelming cosmic entities that embody entropy and the end of all things. How is this in any way enhanced by turning them into such ordinary human characters? Anyway, besides that, the crown looks bad, the heterochromia is a cringeworthy trope to employ here, and his thighs are way too thin to be sexy under that shitty ratty loincloth. At a baseline, Darkstar Yorick is really solid, and it starts from a great concept. Darkstar is the end of universes, so how perfect for them to have a gravedigger. His body is this nexus of rocky planet remains swirling around a central cosmic void. He carries the accretion disk of a black hole on his back, and his head is this empty mandibled, almost insectoid mask emblazoned with a symbol of destruction. It's not S tier, perhaps, but it's solid. It works for what he is, and I genuinely think his splash art is one of the prettiest ones in the entire skin line. But then there's the Maiden, who is a generic pretty human woman? Huh? Or, well, to be fair, the Maiden is actually almost great. I like the jagged rocks and the cosmic glow of her appropriately monstrous body, and I guess the idea is to play that up against the conventional beauty of her face, but why do that? Like, what's this for? How does this interact in any way with the Darkstar fantasy? I am genuinely kind of baffled here. What is this supposed to add to the character? This is so completely incoherent, I don't really know what to make of it. A legendary as a launch skin. Well, that always goes well. Chosen of the Wolf Ambessa has probably the coolest launch trailer that a skin has ever had in the Blood, Sweat, and Tears music video, which I've discussed extensively elsewhere. And as a skin, parts of it are pretty cool. The big hair like a lion's mane, the red tattoos, the spine-like design of the gauntlets. Hell, for all that I am really tired of gold in the color schemes of skins, black, red, and gold is a great color combination, especially for her skin tone, and there's some great animations to this one too. But then, unfortunately, the visual effects kick in, and the entire color scheme gets drowned and blurred by a big, muddy red glowing haze with not very well chosen shadowy black accents, and I'm sorry, but in motion, this skin just looks genuinely hideous. Its color scheme is a complete mess, and any of the cool shape language gets turned to absolute mush visually. If they wanted a transformation mechanic on this legendary skin, they should have actually given it one instead of this unreadable visual nonsense. This really isn't very good. If the idea of Chosen Wolf Katarina was to do a kind of Elden Ring Melania tribute, then I don't think Katarina is the right choice for that when Fiora is right there. As I've said, I'm sick of gold as a dominant color in League of Legends skins. It's so tacky at this point, but at least Katarina plays up the contrast really nicely with that shock of red hair and the black bodysuit. Frankly, I kind of wish that she wasn't showing skin here, mostly because I think the black of the suit would make much better contrast than skin tone with red scribbles on it. Those tattoos really don't read very well in-game, and especially the bare thighs here just kind of looks silly rather than sexy to me. It feels like the skin can't decide if it wants to be a sexy, agile assassin or a fully armored knight. Either of those ideas could have made for a solid skin, but being stuck between them, it just comes off as uncommitted and a little bit messy to me. There's way too much detail concentrated up top, the tattoos don't read well from the League of Legends in-game perspective, and if this is meant to be fan service, sorry, I don't even really think that this is particularly sexy. Pure white and pale gold are not a terrible color combination, but it's a combination that runs a serious risk of bleeding and blending with each other, especially in motion and especially zoomed out like you might see in League of Legends. Pantheon suffers from this a bit with his hair poking out of the bottom of his helmet, mostly just kind of blurring the separation of shapes on his model, which fortunately isn't a huge problem for him, but it's gonna get pretty bad on Swain. And I don't really have that much to say about Chosen of the Wolf Pantheon specifically. I like the helmet, I guess, there's cool shapes on it, and the bright red cloak is a striking part of the character design. That works, but beyond that, he really doesn't look chosen so much as he looks like just a faceless grunt who could be any of 1,000 generic soldier enemies in a Diablo expansion or something. There's next to no individuality to him here, and next to no storytelling about who he might be, except some warrior who went to Wolf's death realm. The skin bio implies that maybe this is kind of intentional, that he's an anonymous soldier, which, okay, fine, but that doesn't make the skin any less boring to look at. Swain is probably the second best skin of this skin line, and the coat is a big part of why. First of all, I quite like the spiked collar around the neck, especially in the splash art where it has some straight-up Warhammer fantasy vibes, but the really good move here is turning the hanging sleeves of his coat into the pelt of a wolf, complete with dangling claws just waiting for the demon transformation. That really fucks. And I like that Swain's red tattoos form clear scars on his chest, doing some actual storytelling about how he lived and died, and justifying somewhat why he is shirtless here. I kind of would have preferred that he was wearing a torn shirt to emphasize that storytelling, but whatever, it works well enough. The biggest flaw in this skin is that when Swain transforms into a demon, and before we go further, let me just give a shout out to the wings made of swords here. That is so over the top and cheesy that it loops right back around and becomes super badass. But the biggest flaw is that he doesn't actually transform into a wolf. His prestige version does for some fucking reason, but not this one. The wolf part is literally just a mask, and that kind of sucks a little bit. Like, with a full werewolf transformation, this would have been an S-tier skin. Riot, you have to stop de-aging Swain for fan service. The Swain fuckers want to fuck him because he is old, not in spite of it. The way that Swain is presented here, he looks like Silas or even Draven, but he doesn't really look like Swain. And while we're at it, Swain's whole thing is being this perfectly postured, totally in control mastermind. So what are you doing with this unshaved neckbeard, messy hair, and lopsided fuckboy gimmick suit? On either Silas or Draven, I think this exact design could have absolutely fucked. But on Swain, it feels like such a total waste of what his character is supposed to be for, a misapplication of his strengths. It's like making a skin for Braum that makes him a skinny twink. Even if it looks like a sexy twink, why would you do that with Braum? On the positive side, the wings still look very cool, and I do like the big fur collar on the jacket a lot. It has a lot of personality, but I just can't stop being annoyed that this skin gets a full werewolf transformation for Swain when the base version needed it so much more. And on the base version, by the way, it would have been much better fan service. Kindred is, I think, inarguably the biggest success of the Chosen of the Wolf skin line. It's a reinterpretation of Lamb and Wolf essentially as Noxian deities. Noxus worships the wolf above all other forms of death, and so here, even Lamb wears the aspect and mask of wolf. Now, the skin can't quite make Wolf himself as scary and impressive as the splash art of the concept demands. He remains just a slightly silly-looking floating head on Summoner's Rift, but that's for gameplay clarity reasons, and there's not much a skin can do about that. Lamb, though, looks genuinely amazing, with a big red mane providing a powerful contrast to her pale grey fur. And the gold, while still my least favourite part of the skin line's colour scheme, is used with restraint as an accent here. The detail of Lamb's bow arm being tinted black and slathered in red, too, as though it's stained with blood, is appropriately grimdark for the character, and I quite like the rough-looking red rope work that's on this character. The sharp metal accents woven into the hair also adds a real wildness to Lamb that really fits the concept here. This is a frickin' excellent skin, and it really should have been the legendary. Where all the other Victoria skins of 2024, Sona, Tryndamere, and Kog'Maw, all acquitted themselves quite well, Kog'Maw with his adorableness, and Sona and Tryndamere with a kind of well-crafted, quiet dignity, not so much for poor Master Yi. And the trouble here for me is the costuming, mostly. It's messy. The base version of the skin has the same quietly downplayed brass and purple as the rest of the Victoria's line this year, but the decoration on Yi's clothes are just too much for that. The low contrast of the color scheme causes all the streaks and embroideries and the complex patterns on the helmet and the shoulder armor and all of that just to blur together, and it looks really noisy without strong distinction. If you can somehow manage to hit Challenger and grab that chroma, Yi switches to a black and white and gold color scheme that can actually make the details pop, but short of that, yeah, sorry, you're stuck with visual mud, I'm afraid. This one really isn't worth grinding for. So, the Arcane skins. Shorts can be 3 minutes long now, but yeah, that won't be nearly enough. This is gonna have to be a full video. Settle in, folks, we're reviewing all of the Arcane skins, and it's gonna take a second. Starting with... Singed is probably the character who is, in-game, the least like he is in Arcane. He's one of the OG League of Legends champions, of course, and he was designed at a time when the game was scarcely more than a bunch of bootleg Warcraft 3 character models being bounced off of each other. Consequently, giving him an Arcane skin was always going to be a challenge because, Singed doesn't fight in Arcane, basically at all. He uses none of his in-game kit, and is in fact a complete reboot of the entire character. He doesn't fit over his old model anymore. So there's some awkwardness in taking his much higher fidelity and higher detail Arcane design, which is fairly down-to-earth, and slapping it onto a character model from 2008 when the game was basically a complete cartoon. There's an absurdity in watching this skinny, scrawny, laconic science man lugging around an enormous blast door for a shield and a giant shimmer tank on his back. It really does not work at all with who Singed is within Arcane, just not on any practical level. It's cute that Rio is inside the shimmer tank on his back, although I can't help but notice that they're using a cutesy version of her instead of the half-desiccated corpse that she actually is in the show, which the point of Singed putting her in that tank and desiccating her is that he's willing to cruelly abuse the innocent to reach his goals, and Rio's corpse is supposed to be a grim reminder of that, so cutifying her feels rather like missing the point. No, this was never gonna work. It was always going to look pretty bad, and maybe once Singed gets a full update, this skin can commensurately be changed so it'll work, but this is about as good as an Arcane Singed skin could possibly be, and it's not good at all. Speaking of characters whose base model can't carry an Arcane skin, hello, Vander Warwick, you look literally f*** all like anything that appears in Arcane, the show. In Arcane, Vander Warwick's face is kept more human because, well, the story kind of needs him to still almost have humanity left to save, right? It needs him to look a little bit still like Vander for his storytelling. Unfortunately, Warwick in League of Legends is a wolf furry, and the marble-like statuesque final corruption of Ascended Vander from Arcane, the show, doesn't really map cleanly onto that. So what we get instead is an awkward compromise. A bright grey, hairless Warwick with a ton of messy gold nonsense grafted onto him, and a hollow tube-like tail, which at least to me just looks kind of silly, to be honest. Short of making a legendary skin with an entirely new model, there was never gonna be any way to actually make Warwick look like his Arcane incarnation, so the skin is probably doing the best it can under the circumstances, but for my money, I just don't think this really works. I really don't think they should have done this. A character that fares much better than Singed or Warwick, though, is Professor Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger was always pretty close to his in-game incarnation in the show already, so this is a much easier design problem to solve. Although, since the in-game version of Heimerdinger always wears his goggles, his model rig isn't pre-programmed with a way to blink or do facial expressions, which means that Professor Heimerdinger in-game is just kind of staring forever without ever blinking, and that's a little bit unsettling, especially from the top-down in-game camera perspective. Still, I like that he plays his song in the recall, and in that animation he gets a little bit of custom blinking animation as well, which, thank God. All in all, this is a simple but genuinely excellent little reskin of Heimerdinger to match how he looks in Arcane. Very good job. Next up, Caitlyn in her fascist arc, which the show never actually really dealt with in the narrative. They just kind of skipped over that, which, well, that's a discussion for a different video. Anyway, this is Caitlyn taking a dark turn as a character, letting the trauma of her mother's death lead her into an authoritarian heel turn. One of the lovely animation details in the show is that after Caitlyn's mother dies, you can visibly see that she's clenching her jaw almost constantly in every scene that she's in, where in Season 1, she usually has a much more relaxed facial posture. It makes her look stern, severe, and constantly angry in Season 2. I bring this up because, she looks a bit cheerful in the character model here, doesn't she? Her expression is bright, fairly relaxed, even perhaps with the slightest hint of a smile on her lips, which, I don't know, between that and the brighter and much more colorful color palette that they've given her here relative to the show, the vibes are a little bit off from who she is in Arcane at this point. This is not helped by the way that her big Imperious militaristic cloak from the show here is cut down to an almost sort of cutesy half cape instead. In the show, her cloak hangs heavy on her shoulders as a bit of storytelling. Her duty and her choices are weighing on her, but here the cloak is small and light and flapping around gently, kind of losing out on the point of that part of the character design. And yes, that is almost certainly a concession to prevent her in-game silhouette from being changed too much. It just combines with the chill facial expression of the bright colors to create a really different vibe, which I think hurts the verisimilitude a bit. To me, this just doesn't quite look like Caitlyn does in the show, which that's kind of supposed to be the whole point of this. Still, this is probably the least egregious of the costume changes in this batch of skins, and since it's mostly a vibes problem, and since there's a reasonable argument that her silhouette can't be changed too much, I'm willing to somewhat forgive it. Speaking of odd vibes, this skin has a prestige version. Again, this is supposed to be Caitlyn at her worst, the darkest, most corrupted point in her character arc, so it's just odd vibes to celebrate that by giving it a fashiony prestige skin. Of course, that's not the point of prestige skins. They don't really interact with the character's story. They're just supposed to be fancy fashion, and from that angle, yeah, sure, this is a fine prestige skin. A pantsuit with shiny rhinestones, a Louis Vuitton-esque pattern designed in the cape, and some shiny brass designs on the jacket. It looks classy to me, and frankly, a little bit understated for what prestige skins usually go for, which I find kind of refreshing. The glasses and the makeup give her a cool, sort of haughty look, which, I mean, yeah, that's an interesting outfit. I can't really see that there's anything wrong with it. Now, Brawler Vi's idle animation looks a little bit weird from the front. This is because it's designed to look good from the top-down camera in-game, and I suspect that the way she holds her gauntlet created readability issues from that camera perspective, so they have distorted the model to compensate. This is called cheating to camera in animation, and it happens everywhere. It's not a flaw with the character model, it just looks really funny from the front here. No, the flaws with Brawler Vi are of a different flavor, because all of the Arcane skins are commemorative skins, which is to say, their main purpose is to look like and reference stuff that happens in Arcane and give players the opportunity to play the version of the character that exists in the show. With that in mind, then, why did they change Vi's gauntlet? Her right gauntlet here is this scrap gauntlet, clearly cobbled together from different pieces. It even has custom animation where it rattles around, and that doesn't happen in Arcane. There isn't a moment in Arcane where her gauntlets break down and have to be fixed with scrap. They stay as they are and functional for the whole show. The show kind of implies that they're losing power and might break, but it never follows up on that, and if her gauntlets broke or had to be fixed, or if she had to get a new one, that would be a big story moment for the character. The gauntlets are an important part of Vi's character design and storytelling. So, on a skin whose primary purpose is to play the version of the character that appears in the show, why would you change a design feature in a way that implies a completely different story than the one that is actually in the show. It undercuts the whole point of the skin. It's like if they sold an official Jinx costume in the merch store, but it came with a completely pink wig. Like, Jinx with pink hair could be cool, sure, but that's not the point of buying the official costume. The point is to be accurate to the show and its storytelling, so why invent a fake part of the story that never actually happens? On the skin itself, the mismatched gauntlet adds a little bit of interesting visual contrast, a bit of asymmetry, and there's some lovely animations on it. It's not bad design as such, it's just a bafflingly weird decision to, on the one hand, sell this as Arcane, Brawler Vi, and then on the other hand, fully invent a version of the character who does not appear in Arcane. It's a weird decision, but it's not going to be the last time that these skins make that decision. For example, Survivor Jace, a skin which doesn't quite seem to know which Jace it wants to portray visually. It's trying to be fucked up, barely alive time traveler Jace with his coat all torn up and his animation having him act exhausted. Like, his laugh animation is literally him laughing one time and then hunching over because he's too tired to go on. But then, it's also trying to be the final battle armored Jace with his hair done up all nice and his beard trimmed clean, and with the makeshift leg brace that he made from his hammer completely gone. The result is that this skin doesn't really feel like either version of the character. It doesn't really feel like barely alive time traveler Jace because it doesn't have his ragged hair, his rough appearance, and it doesn't have the leg brace, which is narratively an incredibly important character design feature for that version of the character, because with that leg brace, he literally copies Victor's disability. It's an important part of the character storytelling between the two of them. It also doesn't have his torn up and ruined counselor coat, which symbolized the final destruction of that part of his life, all of his political ambitions finally giving way to the hero who does the right thing no matter what it might cost. And because of the mixing, it also doesn't feel quite like the final battle version of Jace, hardened, determined, and practical, incorporating dark colors into his design to signify the dark places that his journey has taken him to, armoring up with steely resolve to face his closest friend for the fate of the world, because rather than that steely, determined version of Jace, he's all hunched over and tired and exhausted and his coat is all torn up. It's not the same version of the character. I can understand wanting to try and create one design that looks sort of like every version of the character from Season 2, but I just don't think it works. It doesn't look like Jace from Arcane Season 2. It looks like a version of Jace that was drawn from memory by someone who wasn't really paying attention when they were watching the show. The story is much the same with Arcane's savior, Victor, a skin which, again, rather than try to visually represent what Victor actually looks like in the show, tries to merge a couple of different versions of him into one thing, and it is frankly even less successful at it than Jace is. It is trying on the one hand to be cult leader Victor, the long-haired, robe-wearing guru version of him that uses his old crutch as a shepherd's crook. On the other hand, it is trying to be spirit realm Victor, the glowy, angelic, magic ghost version of him that exists inside of the meta space of the Arcane in the Hex Core. Here's the problem, though. In the Arcane realm, Victor doesn't have long hair. In fact, he forever has the hair that he had back when he first met and formed his partnership with Jace. And this is an important bit of storytelling because it shows that when Victor imagines himself, the best version of himself, his deepest self-conception, he imagines himself at that time with Jace when they shared their beautiful Hextech dream of saving the world. The short hair is an important character design storytelling feature because it reflects something important about who Victor is as a person and how he thinks of himself. And by giving him the longer, floppy hair instead, well, that storytelling is completely lost. The long hair, like the robes, is a design feature from his real-world self in the show. It never appears in the Arcane realm. But to match the color scheme of the Arcane realm, they have changed the color of his robes from blue to pink. The problem is, the robe that he wears in the real world in the show is made from the blue blanket that Jace wrapped him in when he was first revived by the Hex Core. It is a blanket which, as a specific trinket of Jace's affection for Victor, acts as another important bit of storytelling. Even once he evolves, becomes the Herald of the Arcane, the cloak that he wears is made from the burned remains of that blue blanket, even after Jace blasted a hole through it. It is a visual signifier that there is still, even in spite of everything Victor says and does, still a part of him that holds on to his relationship to Jace. It is a signifier that his humanity is still in there. It is an absolutely key part of character design storytelling for Arcane Victor. So Arcane Savior Victor doesn't have the angelic Arcane Realm Victor's hair or his weird glowing body, which are important character storytelling features of that version of him, and it also doesn't have the blue blanket robe, which is one of the most important pieces of character design on Victor as a character in Season 2. In trying to reach for both versions of the character, it succeeds at producing neither, and it manages to miss out on the most important character design storytelling features of both versions of Victor. And it also really doesn't help that between the color scheme and the visual effects, this really just kind of looks like a Spirit Blossom skin that got lost and ended up in the wrong skin line. This is really not very good as an Arcane Victor skin. The problems continue with Last Stand Echo, who also doesn't look how Echo looks during the Last Stand in the show. Echo wasn't wearing a bright teal half jacket. He wasn't wearing a Jinx-style hood. He's missing his red scarf, which is like an important and highly recognizable character design feature in his design, and most bafflingly, his weapon didn't look like that in Arcane. In Arcane, he grabbed a floating clock hand inside the Hexgate tower because, you know, his power is time. That's the whole point of it, is that it is a clock hand. But in this skin, instead, it's this contraption? It's got a handle and a tube and a sort of fishbones-like face on the end of it, and I don't know where the hell that came from. Much like with Brawler Vi and her weird gauntlet, it looks like it's from a completely alternate version of the show, and I have to ask, why? Where is this from? Why is this here? What are these changes supposed to do for the character? What are they supposed to add to the skin? The whole point of this skin is that you get to play as Echo from The Last Stand in the show when he saves the world, his finest hour, the arguable dramatic climax of the whole story. So why doesn't it look like that? Why does he look like a character from a version of the show that doesn't exist? Why is he wearing things that he never wore and using gear that he never had? What's the point of doing it like this? Because, like, okay, there are different needs for character design between a show like Arcane and a game like League of Legends. There are good reasons to change some colors around, for example, or to alter the silhouette. There are good reasons to make adjustments for gameplay or technical reasons. These things happen, that's understandable. Singed and Warwick were never going to be able to actually have Arcane-accurate skins. They aren't built for that. But inventing a whole new gauntlet for Vi, giving Echo a completely different outfit and weapon, these are storytelling decisions that say something about who the character is and where they are as people and what they have been through. These are decisions that directly contradict Arcane, and for what? I genuinely do not understand what chain of decisions led to this outcome. Something I do understand, however, and I understand it perfectly, is Arcane Gacha Jinx. Oh, I'm sorry. Fractured Jinx. Back when Riot pulled their $500 Faker skin bullshit, I predicted that it was a test run to see if they could get away with charging that much money for an in-game cosmetic, and that the plan was probably going to be to introduce something like a $250 skin down the line once the $500 skin had absorbed all the outrage. I hate being right. But I do love being spiteful, so this skin is trash. This is garbage. Nobody should buy it, and buying it should be considered fucking embarrassing. Not because the skin itself, as an artistic product, is particularly bad. Well, it's not good, and we'll get into that, but because this is so naked, cynical, and ugly. This is such an obvious money grab. This is Riot Games counting on the fact that gacha has normalized whaling, has normalized disgustingly exploitative gambling mechanics, and they are so excited that that's going to allow them to charge most of the price of a Nintendo fucking Switch for a video game cosmetic. Riot makes literal billions of dollars a year. Mark Merrill can piss and moan as much as he wants about, oh, we need that money to make things like Arcane, we can't afford it otherwise, but as long as the executives are pulling six-figure salaries of that company, and as long as they are casually laying off hundreds of creative workers who are actually responsible for making that goddamn money, I'm not buying any of that bullshit. Much like how nobody should buy this skin. Now, to be fair, the skin itself is mostly competent. It's okay as a purely technical exercise. There's some nice mechanical animation on the gun, I will give it that. But also, this skin is gall, like any version of Powder or Jinx in Arcane itself. Look at its animations. Look at how it is presented. It wears a more or less show-accurate costume, but nothing in the animation of this thing feels at all like Jinx does in Arcane. Nothing in her behavior evokes that character. Jinx in Arcane, especially at the final stand, which is what this skin is supposed to depict, is a heartbroken, traumatized survivor of unimaginable pain, and her animation reflects that. Her inner turmoil, her determination, and her pain shows in the way that she moves. Not so much on Arcane Fractured Jinx, though, because all of her animation is generic comedy Looney Tunes nonsense. She respawns with a big ta-da gesture, and she rides her minigun like a hoverboard in her home guard animation and plays it like she's shredding an electric guitar in her dance animation. Even her basic run is every bit as bouncy as frickin' Tristana. And then there's the Powder bit. One of her forms is that of Powder from the alternate timeline, which the whole point of that alternate timeline is that that version of Powder never has to learn the cruelty or the violence that Jinx has to learn. The whole point of that version of the character is that she would never pick up a minigun and try to kill someone. But hey, we gotta sell a cosmetic that's half the price of a PS5, so f the meaning of Arcane as a piece of art, f the characters and what they want and how they behave. Just cram some shit in the gacha machine because we gotta make some money out of this. This skin is 8 times the price of a typical Ultimate skin, with less than half of the features. At that price, I think that the least a customer should be able to expect is that the animation of this fucking cosmetic would match the tone of the animation in the show. The least that a customer should be able to expect is that the depiction of the character is accurate and makes sense with who that character is in the show. But you can't expect that, because Riot Games isn't interested in providing you with high-quality products. They just want something that looks, on the surface, just fancy enough, just high-quality enough that someone will pay for another 30 pulls on their shit-ass, worthless gacha bullshit. $250 you've got to be kidding me. Oh my god, you're still here. That was like 2 hours of me just talking about League of Legends skins. Are you okay? Is everything all right at home? Or are you all right? Or, oh, you fell asleep. You fell asleep while you were listening to this. Sorry. I'll try to be quiet for... I'll teach you to fall asleep to my videos, jerk. Anyway, since you're here and you're awake now, coincidentally, I did promise that we'd do a little bit of statistics. So, this year there were 4 skins, which I awarded with an S rank, 27 A rank skins, 35 B rank skins, 35 C rank skins, 24 D rank skins, and 5 skins that earned the coveted, highly exclusive F rank for total failure. And I'm not a statsmatician, but that does look like a fairly normal distribution to me. It's weighted mostly towards the average, which is what you would expect, because most things are somewhere around the average. In amongst the filler skins, though, the packing peanuts that are shoved into skin lines just to pad out the numbers, there are a few gems here and there. The S ranks, of course, are the highlights of the year for me. I still love Range Shepherd Melio so much. What a perfect little creation. And I genuinely was not expecting to truly love a Darkstar design of all things this year. But the A rank skins also had a few lovely surprises. Take Heavenscale Ezreal, for example, because Heavenscale is pretty mediocre. It's just one of those skin lines whose main purpose is to put a group of champions into some nice-looking, appealing costumes in order to commemorate a calendar event. And there is an extent to which expecting great character design from those skin lines is like expecting poetic brilliance from a rack of greeting cards at the airport. It's not really what they're for. But Ezreal manages to transcend the tedium a little bit. Between his sharp, arrogant smirk, that little wild tuft of hair, and the excellent use of his gauntlet to justify just giving him an actual dragon arm, there's some storytelling there and a real sense of character. He looks like a smug, cocky little but a charming one of the kind. He looks like someone who's going to get into trouble and who's going to have to cleverly get himself out of it again. He looks like someone that a story might happen to. And yeah, we're grading on a generous curve here, but that's much more engaging than seasonal skins, which are just a character in a nice costume. Meanwhile, the comedy skins came in really strong this year. Cheddar Thief Twitch, being a cheese-themed parody of Pyramid Head, cannot possibly have been a skin on anyone's bingo card, nor am I willing to believe that anyone predicted that that many people were going to get that horny for Janitor Thresh. Honestly, I really hope that the comedy skins will get a little bit more of a focus in the future, because if there's one thing League of Legends does not need any more of, it is skins that just make the characters look cool or badass or sexy. And it's not that there's anything wrong with cool, badass, or sexy skins. I loved High Noon Evelynn this year. It's just that is so much the constant repetitive default mode of skins that when we get a skin like Choo Choo Ornn or Toy Terra Cho'Gath, it feels like a total breath of fresh air by comparison. It feels exciting and fun. And that's really what I want out of League of Legends skins. I've not played the game in years, although that casual mode they've introduced in 2025 is really kind of tempting me. So what excites me about skins is first and foremost artistic creativity, which does exist in huge amounts at Riot Games. For all of that company's infinite laundry list of flaws and problems and their terrible executives, they are damn good at hiring good talent. And when that talent gets to properly flex, that's when we get the good stuff. Like Range Shepherd Melio and Faerie Court Tristana or Blood Moon Zyra and Fright Night Zeri. There is gold in them there hills. And hell, even skins that aren't creatively interesting as character designs can, sometimes, produce genuinely wonderful splash art. Like, there's a reason that I have 3 full videos over on my main channel just gushing over how gorgeous League of Legends splash art can be. And frankly, I look forward to new skins and skin lines just for that. And so at the end, I'll say that I really hope that I am wrong. I hope that introducing the economic pressure and priorities of gacha will not irreversibly damage the creative direction of the whole game and all of its skins, but I guess we'll see how that shakes out in 2025. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Remember to be kind to one another. Have solidarity with those who struggle, and may the tides of history wash gently over us all.